Hello, my name is Xander. I usually go by zander2758 on most platforms. I'm not a content creator of any kind, and but I do plan on making content at some point, but it will take a while since I don't even have the hardware currently, and I don't have any kind of scripts ready, so don't hold your breath.
I am Monster Maze. I run a Zelda channel on YouTube, and it's mostly like cinematic theories and like gameplay related videos. Yeah, that's about it.
Hylian, Hylian. According to Meteor, you have no audio. Ac-
Yeah,
According to
you don't
Meteor,
have.
yeah.
They can hear me and Xander, but they cannot hear you. So I guess in
So
OBS,
strange.
your actual your microphone itself is not coming through, but your desktop audio is. So they can hear us, but they cannot hear you.
Can you guys hear now?
Yeah.
I think this should be it. Yeah. I assume they have now. Well, I'm sorry for the confusion. Holy crap. So we're going to be operating here. We're going to analyze late sequels. So just to make things clear on the definition of a late sequel, a late sequel would be a sequel to a specific work that was originally unplanned on release of said original work and would only be planned and released at least 5 years after the original. So I'm sure everyone here has different experiences with art in general. So we might cite some examples here that each of us might not have necessarily experienced, but we'll explore our own individual, like our lists or experiences with specific late sequels to find a common ground to understand what should be a good or a bad late sequel. So, um, Xander, if you want to start with examples like your experience with late sequels, can you name any of them? Like how historically do you most often find good late sequels or bad late sequels? How is it in your experience?
Well, from my experience, I found mostly good ones, like the ones I listed for you. There was Mega Man 11, Street Fighter 4, uh, OMVC 3, Devil May Cry 5. Fallout New Vegas somewhat counts, not really, but hey, I like to think it does. The only ones I could think of that I experienced very personally were Max Payne 3 and Fallout 3 mainly, and that is the kind of thread I saw it between those games. It's like the ones that are good, the story either barely matters or doesn't matter. So I guess that is saying something. That
Mm-hmm.
would be my experience with them. It's like mostly positive, but if a late sequel for anything I like was announced, I would still be concerned in many ways.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Don?
I think uh, I think a late sequel is very it very much depends on the viewer. Um, if you've experienced a late sequel for the first time, like that's your first experience with that franchise, a lot of people are much more forgiving and they're like, okay, this is my first time. What like before the stream started, we were talking about Fallout. I played Fallout 3 for the first time, and it was my first Fallout game ever, and I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was amazing. But there was also a lot of old school Fallout guys, like who only played 1 and 2, and they were not really that satisfied with 3. And I didn't really get that. I didn't understand why they felt like that. So I still have yet to play the old game. So, until I do, I won't be able to understand that. And I think that goes for every late sequel because a lot of late sequels are either reboots or hey, let's go back to this franchise after like a decade. and it's going to draw in a whole new audience who don't know any better, don't know any better. So for them, it's a very different experience than the old school people.
In many ways, yes. Like something in common between like Star Wars, The Force Awakens, and Fallout 3 is that they are sequels, but in the sense of, oh, some other company bought the IP and now they are doing a sequel to it many years later.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that it's good that you bring up Star Wars because I know a lot of people who actually really love the prequel trilogy, including me. I had not seen the original trilogy until after that. So, for me, my whole experience with Star Wars was tainted by the fact that I didn't watch it from the very beginning. I had nothing to compare it to. When I saw The Phantom Menace for the first time, I was like, wow, this is really cool. At the same time, there were some people who were really big into the original trilogy were going like, oh, this is horrible. Why? This movie is terrible. And, I didn't feel that way because I didn't see the original until after the prequels.
And how do you feel about the sequel trilogy? Because at the end of the day, the sequel trilogy kind of works as well as a late sequel. Actually, even more in a way than the prequels, because of how like the sequel trilogy needed to be crafted in comparison to the original trilogy. Because when you're making a prequel, you already have a specific end goal that you know where you want your characters and your world to end. But when you're working on a sequel, like you really need to use that as a foundation to create something completely new. And have you watched the sequel trilogy? Are you into it? Is there any other late sequel that
Yeah.
you got into contact with?
Yeah, I've seen the sequel trilogy. I thought they were okay. I thought they were pretty good. Um, the second one, which everybody hates, is actually one of my favorites. But it like I will admit that it doesn't feel like it was planned out as well as the like they didn't have the same type of vision that they had even with the prequels. Yeah, they're not the best movies. They have some problems on a technical level, like the way they were shot. The dialogue was not that great, but you could at least feel like they were building up to something with every movie until finally coming to the climax in Revenge of the Sith, finding out how Anakin became Darth Vader. It felt earned at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And the sequel trilogy doesn't have that as much. It feels more like big corporations trying to do something like, oh, what is the trend? What are people most interested in? And as a result, the story doesn't seem as well planned as it could have been. And I don't like that as much about them. In terms of production, they're very well made, which is to be expected with a budget like a Disney-sized budget.
Yeah, yeah. I understand that perspective. Yes. Like when like I don't think that Star Wars ever got that much budget before, like for its for the effects, for everything. Like it's visually stunning. Like The Last Jedi, like it might take a lot of criticism, but there's still like one of the redeeming
Beautiful looking
factors.
movie.
Yes, exactly. The cinematography and the visuals are probably the main thing that carries it. But yeah. Now from
Well,
for oh yeah, go ahead, Don.
well, if we're talking about late sequels that like the Star Wars sequels I can digest pretty easily. It's just popcorn flicks to me. I can get into it. Probably my biggest complaint, like one good example for me of a movie that didn't work for me as a late sequel was Ghostbusters, the new one. It
Afterlife,
felt
right?
too well. Afterlife was more like a homage, but the one before that has nothing to do with the fact that it had a female cast or anything. Uh, it, it I really don't care what gender people want to portray in a movie. As long as the movie is entertaining, I think it's fine. But the big mistake that they made with that movie is they paid zero respect to the original source material. They just pretended like it. First of all, the movie was called Ghostbusters, So it wasn't even called Ghostbusters 3 or Ghostbusters like re-energized or
Or the new
like it,
generation or some nonsense like that.
Yeah.
yeah, like there was no continuation. It just pretended like there wasn't already a foundation there to begin with, and I really despised the movie for that. And Afterlife actually kind of did, which I did respect because it did bring back the old casts, and it acknowledged that it took place in the same universe, you know. And the movie before that, I don't even know what to call the movie. Ghostbusters 2016 or something.
That's what most people call it,
Yeah.
Ghostbusters 2016.
Yeah, like that movie just didn't do it for me because it pretends like there was nothing before it.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand that feeling.
And that's just a challenge that you have when you reboot a series or you make a late sequel to it. You have to trust that the people, at least a significant portion of those people, did like the originals or saw the originals. And you gotta throw them a bone too. You know, they've been invested in this franchise for a very long time. Same thing with the Terminator movies,
Yeah.
those types of, and the new Matrix movie as well. I did not like the new Matrix movie, even though it does have the original characters.
Yeah.
It just studios are so afraid to just continue where something left off
Man.
and trust that people will understand that there was that was built on something else and will go back to rewatch those movies. They're so afraid to leave out people who are completely new to the Matrix. But you cannot really do that. It's the Matrix. Come on, it's a cultural phenomena. You don't have to pretend like, oh, all those 16-year-olds that never saw the original trilogy, we got to at least lure them into this movie too. No. That's not necessary.
You should have been here for episode 1 of Roundtable. Like the very first one was precisely about Matrix Resurrections. We were very unhappy with the film as well. Like it's a film, a late sequel that really tries to get away with being cynical about its universe and its own creation by having a messaging that a lot of people resonate with, like the idea that a lot of late sequels exist as a product of corporate exploitation of IPs. And so if they call them out, then it's okay to be as bad as it is. Like it's kind of ironic how it turned out. And you're completely right as well. Like the way that it handled story, it really didn't uh, pay as much attention as it should to how things were left off in the third film, because
Yeah.
while the trilogy had a particular end, right, like it had a conclusion of its own, it still was possible to make a sequel to it. There were still some world building elements that were left open, like the ideas of how Neo was a Christ figure in him, symbolically speaking, and thus, if they summon this idea, this Judeo-Christian symbolism through the world of the Matrix, then it would be possible for this Messiah to come back in a new world where, like
Mm.
even in the third movie, you have programs that are starting to want to become humans. Like there is space for something new, a conflict that is relevant to the previous films. But the fourth film is so concerned about addressing the meta and the fans, etc., that it kind of doesn't feel like the Matrix anymore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, they
Something they
always
could have
want
also
to.
done, since you mentioned the Christ figure imagery, is that to me, at least, it would be kind of obvious that some people were really invested in their lives in the Matrix, so much so that they even give you an option like, oh, you take the red pill and you come with us and you learn the fruit, or you take the blue pill and stay as it is. I imagine some people did, and Neo basically threw a wrench in that through the Matrix films in a way. So I do imagine that he would basically be persecuted by certain groups.
yeah,
Yeah. I just have a big problem with always having to hit the reset button every
yeah,
time. That's my biggest gripe. That's why I don't hate the Star Wars sequels as much as some other people do, because at least because that's usually the big problem that people give, like the big argument people give it, like, oh, it invalidates the ending of where it left off. Well, the sequel trilogy of Star Wars doesn't invalidate it at all. Just because the Empire was defeated doesn't mean more stuff cannot happen and still stuff can go wrong. In fact, The Mandalorian did a good job at portraying that. Like, yeah, the Empire is gone, but now there's this huge power vacuum, and now suddenly these rebels have to somehow find and create order where previously there was none after the Empire fell. There's still going to be Empire factions all over the galaxy, just that refuse to give up and still want to. They still believe in what they stand for. You're going to have ex Empire people now trying to weasel their way into other businesses and other organizations. So just because they were celebrating at the end of Star Wars of Return of the Jedi doesn't mean it's a fairy tale ending and they lived happy ever after. But the new Matrix movie just doesn't accomplish that at all. It's just like, oh, you thought you escaped the Matrix? Well, there was another Matrix all along, and you never really left. It's like, well, it doesn't match the ending of the third movie.
So we're gonna get to
Well,
Star
I
Wars
would.
eventually. Just before we get there, because what you brought up is interesting, because I have this opinion on the Force Awakens strongly. Like it's also one of the reasons why I even made this banner for the late sequels and I put Rey in there. Specifically, not talking about the Last Jedi, but more specifically the Force Awakens, because the fact that you brought the Mandalorian as a way to bridge these things is also something that will be relevant. But we'll get there eventually. So before before we get to Star Wars, let me just give my own experience as well with late sequels. Historically speaking, like both in films and video games, it's I don't know if it's correct in saying this, but I, at least from my experience, it seems to be. But late sequels seem to be a phenomenon that started not really as recently as people think, but I think stuff like in the 1990s with Terminator 2. I think Terminator 2 might be the very first late sequel that I can think of, because like the first Terminator was Terminator 1 in 1984. They had zero expectation to be as big as it turned out. They had no idea specifically for a sequel, and the sequel would only be planned and released in 1991, like 7 years afterwards. And ever since then, you find other IP starting to spawn similar ideas. Like even the prequel trilogy, to an extent, like it's not the exact same process as we said. Like it's a prequel compared to a sequel, but even then, like the time it
Well,
took
a
for
late
them.
prequel.
Yeah, it's a late prequel, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like the idea of coming back to an IP after a very long time and trying to expand on it in a certain way, like I think Terminator 2 kind of spawned it, and we started to see a very common occurrence in the 2000s and especially the 2010s. And I have a suspicion that it might have to do with like maybe a creative drought among the artistic generations of those times, because never before have we been so reliant on sequels and prequels. Not that this is necessarily bad per se, but I think that we are seeing a lot of studios, a lot of game developers that are trying to revive IPs that were kind of not really planned to have any continuation at all. They were written to be exactly like self-contained and not have any continuation. And because of the necessity of like, we need to make more money, we need to be on the map because everything is globalized now, and we need to be bigger. Everything needs to be bigger. So we're seeing a very common occurrence of this. And from my experience with late sequels in general, it really has given me like the impression that it's extremely rare to find late sequels that are actually great. Like it's much
Yeah.
more common for me to find late sequels that are just awful, that I just can't digest. Like it's it's unbelievable.
Well, it kind of depends on the time period. Like in the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of late sequels to stuff that was already done in the 30s. But by that time, it was so long ago that people, and also there was a big disconnect because everything was still in black and white back then. Some movies didn't even have proper sound. So movies like The Thing from Another World, Dracula, all those old school monster movies,
Mm-hmm.
they got remade in the 60s and 70s by Hammer, and it was justified at that point because suddenly we had color TV and we had proper sound and we could actually hear dialogue and not have cards on the screen, you know. But nowadays we don't have that. There's no real going upwards anymore. So the only thing movie makers can think of is it needs to be bigger. It needs to be more spectacular than the original.
It
Whereas
needs to
that
be
just
live action.
doesn't, yeah, it doesn't always work. Yeah, exactly, with the Disney remakes especially. uh, like it doesn't, oftentimes it misses the point of the original movie, and that doesn't just go for late sequels, that also goes for sequels that are not necessarily late, I guess you could say. uh, just think of a movie like Saw. Like the very first Saw movie was a really good horror thriller movie, and then they started cranking out sequels, and the only thing that they assumed people liked about Saw was the gruesome stuff. Even though the original movie didn't have a lot of gruesome stuff, you didn't really see much in terms of like blood, and it was very tame, that movie. But it was just more the psychology behind it that was really really creepy.
Yeah,
And
I think
and
the director of the first Saw even talked about like, oh, we want to make it like an entire film just take place in like a couple rooms because we didn't have much budget.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's also the same thing that happened with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was a really low indie movie with almost no blood at all. Even though it's called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you didn't really see much. And every subsequent sequel only tries to up the gore and make it even more gruesome. It's like that's not the point of the original movie. That's why I'm a huge Silent Hill fan. My It's probably one of my favorite game franchises besides Zelda and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like Silent Hill is amazing to me. And they're talking about there should be a new Silent Hill movie, Silent Hill game now, because it's been a very very long time. I'm honestly not sure if anyone could ever do a proper Silent Hill game ever again, because I'm pretty sure they're gonna completely miss the point again. What made the original game so good? Because they were made on a low budget, because they were made by people who didn't even know how to program a horror game. All those things culminated together, and it
And they
created
were made
something
because
beautiful.
Capcom like cynically looked at Resident Evil and asked a bunch of people to do it, I think.
Yeah, they were literally like, "Oh, we want you guys to make that," referring to Resident Evil. But
Yeah.
the team that they put on it at Konami, they had no idea how to make a game like that. So instead, they kind of resorted to, "Well, we'll just do our own thing." And these people were very inexperienced, and they just learned as they went, and that made the original game so incredibly good. So anyone who's going to make a new attempt to make a new Silent Hill game in the current day, I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to hit the same notes anymore.
It most likely won't. If the bastardization of Pyramid Head is anything to go by.
Oh
Well,
yeah,
exactly, yeah.
yeah. I've seen and heard a lot. Like I didn't play Silent Hill myself, but I know about its appeal being much more tied to the psychological horror than the cliche violence that a lot of horror media tend to fall into. And
Yeah.
Pyramid Head is basically an icon of that concept, right? I think I might be mistaken, but Pyramid Head is like a reflection on the protagonist, right? It's something
Well,
along those
yeah.
lines.
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
the fact that that Pyramid Head became much more twisted into just a generic slasher villain, like it's
Mascot.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
it completely twisted what he was originally meant to be. But I'm not aware if like basically it's actually an interesting idea that you brought forward because technically a Silent Hill game right now would also count as a late sequel, right?
it
Like there,
would. The
Oh, for
last one was
sure.
like 2012 or something ridiculous.
Yeah, very long time ago.
man.
And even that on its own was kind of a late sequel almost.
And to be honest, if it was like BT, probably would have been like at least decent. Silent Hills, I mean.
Yeah. Well, I loved PT as a game, but I don't think it necessarily had to be a Silent Hill game. They could have easily made a completely different game with a different title based on PT, and it would work too. I don't know why they necessarily wanted to slap the Silent Hill name on it because
It's simple. Number one, Konami. Number two, money.
yeah, because it's something that's already been established, and new IPs always fail to sell nearly as much.
Yeah.
But that's one of the biggest problems we have nowadays, and why we also have so many late sequels, is because it's just easier to bank on something that already has a name instead of creating something else that will have a name later on but doesn't have a name yet.
Yes.
They're just
I
so
think
afraid of.
also a factor is that since that world is already made, it kind of speeds up the process of making something new in that world. At least I think
Yeah,
so.
but if you think about it, every franchise had to have a first at
Yes.
some point. There was a first Zelda, there was a first Assassin's Creed, there was a
Yes.
first
Uh,
everything.
and to clarify, I'm not saying like I'm saying the cynical sense like oh, making like a Zelda 2 would be easier because you made
Yeah.
Zelda 1 and the world already exists. Like, no, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, since those sequels are already like cynically made for money, they're already taking whatever shortcuts they can with it.
Oh,
Is
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean.
No, I gotcha. I gotcha.
Yeah, no, it's a common occurrence, like seeing these kinds of things happen, and it's unfortunate. And it actually kind of ties to what, looking at the comments here, like Logo Steve debated a bit the idea of it being tied to a creative drought. I think he brings a good point that it's also because of executive decisions, and what you guys said kind of points to that. When I said about creative droughts, it's not. I'm not seeing it as just a singular cause for the problem, because yeah, like the I think that the main thing that really drives late sequels to be the way they are is also because of the demands of like meeting larger and larger profits every year. And since there are a lot of people today that have much more access to digital platforms to watch more movies, etc., like whether we like it or not, like it seems like the art consumption today is much more globalized and much more. A lot of people just watch a lot more things today. Like it's much easier to watch things like Netflix, all those digital platforms and streaming. Like the way that they are designed, it incentivizes people to watch more, and they end up actually consuming a lot more because of it. And since we're in an age where we have a lot of generations that grew up with iconic major IPs, it is advantageous for them to bring them back because they'll of course bank on those audiences. But there is also I also say it's a creative drought because when you look at original works as well, it has been much harder to find original works on the same level of original works that came out like in previous decades. Like there are some great ones like recently, like for example The Father, one that was nominated for the Academy Awards last year. Like that's a fantastic film. But but I think that there is a very different kind of culture right now in terms of art production. Like there is this what we call a postmodern movement in art creation that is very it's kind of on its way out apparently. Like there is something called the meta modern movement that is rising now, but The point I'm making is that also one of the reasons why they have been relying a lot on original works is also because of the security of old IPs bringing in people that might be feeling a bit insecure with original works as of late. So I think that's also one of the motivating
Well,
factors there. I don't know what you guys think about it. Actually, I didn't hear you guys talk about original works as much, how they relate to late sequels. So if you guys disagree or agree, you can share your thoughts as well.
I don't necessarily believe that there is a creative drought necessarily. I think people still have plenty of really, really original and good ideas. Everything, like even the old stuff, like as far back as television was invented, um, everything is derivative of something. It's very hard to not be inspired by something that came before it. Uh, but I don't think that there's a creative drought. I think there is a problem with studios wanting a return in their investments. They much prefer to take the safe route and make sure like that the movie ticks all the boxes. It has all the inclusivity, has all the stuff that people like, and what you get is a very bland, very repetitive cycle of movies being made with all the same formula. It has to have humor, it has to have this, it has to have uh, uh, like every type of people of color or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with being inclusive, but if it's becoming a box which needs to be ticked, then you're leaving very little open uh, for actual creativity, because good movies are not supposed to please everyone. There's some of my favorite movies of all time. I can show them to some of my friends and they hate it because it's just not their type of movie. If I show The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is probably one of my favorite movies of all time, if I show that to my brother, he will probably hate it because it's a very slow movie. It has a bit of quirky dialogue in between. It's a very old school type of movie, and it's not supposed to please everyone. And the same goes for a lot of old school movies, and also new movies. There's also there are still directors who dare to do something. If we're bringing it back to video games, for example, Kojima is one of those guys who still dares to take risks with his
Yes.
games.
Like
Uh,
I, if for
Death
example Mario can
Stranding.
make fun of Kojima, for example, every once in a while, like, oh haha, Kojima. He tries to write a coherent story, but it's like I can at least respect the fact that he's at least always trying to do something new
Yeah, I
Yeah,
with
agree.
every game he does. Like even like Metal Gear Solid 5, which was unfinished, he was still like trying to take open world games in a new standard, and you can sort of feel it. And I think he gets close. He doesn't accomplish it. Of course, the game is still not finished, but you could tell that there was far more thought put behind something like Metal Gear Solid 5 than your generic open world game, where it's like, oh, you have a bunch of treasures in the map, you have them marked. Oh, you climb a tower, so you review them all, and it's just,
Mm-hmm.
eh.
yeah. Well, they did that exactly with Death Stranding. Death
Also,
Stranding
oh
is not a
yeah, Metal Gear Solid 5 would count as a late sequel.
Yeah.
That's
I
true.
mean, Death Stranding is not a game for everyone, and Kojima knows that. He even says in some interviews, like, you might not even have fun with the game until 20 hours in, which is a very ballsy thing to say, but he fully embraces the fact that it isn't supposed to be for everyone, and nothing is supposed to be for everyone. If you make something for everyone, it always ends up being something very generic in most cases. There are exceptions that are so good that everybody likes it. Like when Titanic came out for the first time, everybody loved it because it was so well made and it hit all the emotional points that, like, James Cameron is just a freaking genius in that regard.
Yeah.
As a director, he's just phenomenal. But even he has made stuff that kind of missed the mark. Like the Avatar movies are nowhere close to anything he made before when it comes to I don't know. It's very hard to say where the problem lies. If it's rich CEOs who are just trying to make sure that the movies make as much money as possible. People just don't want to invest and take risks anymore. It's why The Hobbit failed as movies compared to Lord of the Rings, in my opinion. Which I can
Yeah,
also give a whole
and you can't
dialogue on.
even
But
tell because, like, I have no experience with Lord of the Rings pretty much, and I haven't watched The Hobbit, but
mm,
it's like I hear so much more talk of Lord of the Rings, despite them being like a decade older, and it's like, wow, I
well,
wonder just what the hell happened then.
if you look at Lord of the Rings, the original trilogy, it was one guy with a vision, and he was like, "We're not going to put any political messages into this movie. We're going to make it as purely Tolkien,
Yeah,
the writer of we're going to make it as much Tolkien as possible, and we're just going to do it purely like that."
yeah, concerned with the
And
lore mainly, right? He's concerned. He was mainly concerned to preserve Tolkien's vision more than anything else. It's kind of ironic
yeah,
looking at. It's kind of like a 180 with what's happening right now with Rings of Power. Like you're, you actually see
yeah,
like the interviews with
more
the
budget.
creative. Yes, exactly. Like it's and what you said, Don, about inclusivity, etc. Like when it's basically that on a larger scale as well, right? Like the fact that the executives are so concerned about checking boxes tells a lot more that they're doing that they're creating these works of art more robotically, like more concerned about just fulfilling specific requirements rather than actually creating. Because I think that the most powerful artistic endeavors are usually the ones where they have a creative vision that has the freedom and has the craft capacity, like to really create something that can reach audiences and is created in a way that fulfills normative a lot of normative requirements, etc., that is not necessarily tied to like studio messaging, etc. And
Yeah,
so I 100% agree with you on that front. Like it's unfortunate because usually inclusivity and stuff like that already existed in previous films, like Terminator 2, for example. They already had a very strong female lead and they did it naturally. Like they didn't include her just to check a box. It was a natural, organic transformation of character within the world of Terminator. And that's things need to be a lot more natural and less tied to, just fulfilling, just checking out those check boxes, etc. So yeah.
yeah. Well, that's how it normally works. But I think it's also just a matter of impatience from uh like people want a return on their investment as quickly as possible. So this movie is going to go, so basically we're valuing quick trends over actual art when it comes to creativity.
Yeah.
Um you can see that trend a lot more because actually what we were talking about before the stream about me playing Elden Ring, which is my very first Souls game. Uh, I did play a little bit of Dark Souls before that. It For some reason they don't want to wait for people to finally get it. When I played Dark Souls for the first time, I hated it, and I was like, "Why is there no difficulty setting? Why is the game so unfair? Why do people even like this game? Why is it so popular?" And then by trying it again and trying it again and just getting back into the flow, at some point I finally started getting it. And you can see the same thing with movies. How many movies do you know that are like a huge cultural hit and phenomenon now? But back in the day, they were not popular at all. They were kind of shot down, actually. Fight Club, Pulp Fiction, which pretty much launched the entire career of
Tarantino.
what's his name again?
Quentin
Of
Tarantino.
Tarantino's.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it, a lot of stuff needs time to grow, and people don't want to take that time anymore. They just want a quick, big blockbuster hit, taking all the money, scrap up the rest with DVD sales later, if there is even any. But at the end of the day, those movies kind of just disappear, and nobody really remembers them 50 years from now. And those big, risky movies, they keep living on because it gets a cult following. There's like people who totally get those movies from the very beginning, and they love it so much that they try to convince other people, look, you gotta watch this movie with me. And slowly but surely it grows and it spreads. And now everybody thinks Fight Club is a masterpiece. Everybody thinks Pulp Fiction was a really good movie, or Reservoir Dogs was a really good movie. Like, what is more valuable at the end of the day? Is it the quick buck or the cultural
Longevity.
impact that might take even 2 generations to grow, but at the end of the day, it does end up being amazing, you know?
It does end up being far more worth too. Like you see with the sequel trilogy and all the articles that were written about how Star Wars toys just don't sell anymore. And
Yeah.
part of that I believe it's because they are trying so hard to appeal to like the old audience with like the nostalgia pandering The Force Awakens, is the fact that they don't just really try anything new, so the new people going in are not going to care about it as much to like buy toys. Like, why would a kid care that much about this sequel trilogy when they have a phone? Just the reality of things, to be honest.
Actually, you bring up a good point about late sequels in this scenario, because a lot of the time these late sequels want to introduce new characters, right? But they are also crafted in a way that they needed to exploit as much as possible
Yes. Like, you,
nostalgia, right?
no one can convince me that Phasma wasn't made just to like have a shiny stormtrooper so they could sell. You
Yeah.
Agreed.
cannot convince me otherwise.
So
Yeah.
like the fact that you have this situation, like there's this challenge where you need your new character to actually earn the hearts of those who are going to the film to actually watch the old characters back. And a lot of the time the late sequels that get a lot of pushback is usually because they are trying to they take the old ones that a lot of people love, and they sideline in the most unnatural form possible to shove the new characters in the spotlight, and they hope that you love the new ones, kind of like what the Star Wars sequel trilogy did. But I think this is something that also perpetrates other late sequels as well. Like there is this constant attempt at trying to make this bridge between the old characters that are the reason a lot of people are coming back just to see it, and try to convince people that to love the new ones. So yeah,
Yeah. I saw that too. I watched two movies back to back in this week actually. I watched Scream, the new one, obviously because they don't title it anymore now, and the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre, also no title. And both movies brought back legacy characters from the first movie, uh, and you can see them trying so hard to shoehorn them in, but they like the environment of the movie itself has changed so much to that point that it doesn't really mean much anymore, which kind of contradicts what I said before. I'll be honest, because I said before, like with Ghostbusters, they didn't even acknowledge the legacy that it had before it. I don't know, maybe I'm just picky about it, but some movies just do it very naturally, and then just like, hey, these characters are still alive, they have a role in this situation. We're not just bringing them back just to be like, hey, fan service, guys. Look, whoo, it's that person from, and they're old now.
yeah,
They're all sad and they try to kill their nephew.
yeah. Oh my god. No, but yeah, like it's a situation where you're really in an artistic conundrum at that point. Like you're trying to you need to make a transition, a natural transition between the old continuity and the new one, to really convince people that it's not just fan service, because at the end of the day, like we've been hearing a lot of how bad fan service is and how nostalgia baiting is such a common tool, but uh, it can work if it's done properly, you know. Like there is such a thing as good fan service, there is such a thing as, you know, bringing back nostalgia. Like I feel like games like Mario and Zelda actually nail that quite well. Like they don't really
Mm.
shove those elements as a way in an unnatural way just to distract you from the core content in the work. Like it's just a more like, wow, this actually makes sense to be here. Like there is this musical reference or this character reference that you can actually make a natural bridge. But there are a lot of cases where even like Jurassic Park, like they're getting like another sequel right now that is also just bringing back tons of old folks into the
Yeah.
mix, and it's also just like, hey, remember this, like the new Chip and Dale film that Disney is actually releasing on Disney Plus. I don't know if you guys watched it. Like I watched the trailer, and it was basically member berries everywhere. Like, oh, remember Roger Rabbit, remember the rescuers, the Chip and Dale Rangers, etc. Like all those cartoons from the 90s, and now they're all back, and one of them is CG now, and we're making Hollywood jokes on top of it. Like it's, yeah.
Yeah. I think Mark Hamill, the guy, the Luke Skywalker,
Yeah,
Mark Hamill, I think he said it best in an interview. He said reunions are inherently disappointing. It's just how it is because you're never going to be able to capture what you did before. Um, which is why I said, even though it's contradictory when I said they don't even acknowledge the complex history of Ghostbusters. Um, you don't always have to do that with characters. You can also just do it with story. You can have a movie that takes place in the same universe, in the same continuation of it, but you don't have to wave around these old people anymore and be like, "Hey, remember these characters that were once there?" Because usually they don't work anymore. Especially stuff from the '90s is extremely cringe when you watch it again now.
yeah.
That yeah, that's just how it is, and that's why Mark Hamill said that during the interview. He said, "When we were together at that moment of in time, at that point, that was magic. That was lightning in a bottle. That was just the right people at the right time." Yeah, sure. 20, 30 years later, you can bring them all back into the same room again, but it doesn't mean it's gonna do the exact same thing. And that's why I brought up The Hobbit compared to Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is such a magical story when like I would argue that the story behind the movies is even more magical than the actual movies because when you
Yeah,
read upon how these people interacted with each other, lived together, how close of a bond they created with each other, how much freedom they had because they were in a very peculiar situation where there was only one studio involved or maybe two, but that's a different story altogether. But there were not that many people involved in it, and they were just like, Peter Jackson, here you go, you can make 3 movies and just do what you got to do, and everything worked out. By the time The Hobbit came along, they brought a they brought back a lot of people who were not even supposed to be there because they were not there in the books. Legolas was not in the books. They made up completely new characters as well. They tried to capture that exact same feeling again, get all these people back together again, except this time there were 5 studios involved instead of one. And just uh, these people were not able to capture the same feeling anymore. And it sucks because we all want to go back to the past and we want to believe that when we take the old and put it back into this situation now, it's going to do the exact same thing again. And oftentimes that's just not the case. And maybe we should let go of that feeling, that urge to keep repeating the past and just create new stuff that also works in a different way.
Well,
that's a beautiful speech.
well, you mentioned how
Sorry.
they try to recreate the feeling. But in a lot of late sequels, I think the fundamental misunderstanding is that they don't even know what the feeling even is
Is
or
I agree.
how it comes by, where it originates from.
Yeah,
They just seem to try their best, like superficially replicate what creates that feeling,
yeah.
but then they miss the mark in one way, and it seems small, but they miss it in such a way that it's so large that you basically ruin it.
So
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask you guys to list a couple of late sequels that you guys think are good and which ones are bad, just on the top of your head. And if so, afterwards we can just pick like two or three of them that we might want to explain why we think it's good or bad as well, outside of the ones that we already talked about. Because in a way, this conversation went so naturally that we actually kind of anticipated some topics that we were supposed to to
Feels good.
address. But do feel free to cite other late sequels and separate them in good and bad. Like, why do you think this one is good? Why do you think this one is bad?
Go ahead.
Oh,
I'm not starting.
oh. I actually have not really memorized anything before this. I have terrible prep work, but when when I started at the beginning, I was talking about the old movies back then. I don't know if you guys know The Thing,
Yes,
like
yes.
I
the
know.
the the John Carpenter one.
Carpenter, yeah.
Yeah. In itself, that's kind of like a late remake, not necessarily a sequel. But there was a sequel to that movie, also called The Thing, which is very confusing. Uh, but that was a very misunderstood movie, in my opinion, because they did actually very cleverly look at the first movie and say, "Oh, there happened something on a base somewhere else," and they actually explain all of that. The only thing holding that movie back is they opted for CG instead of practical effects, which kind of ruined what made the original movie so good. But in terms of story and attempt, I really like that movie a lot more now. Now that I know how much it actually ties into the original, even though like the original thing was from the '80s, the new one is from the 2000s. So that definitely classifies as a late sequel. I would assume.
Well, from what I understand, part of the argument is that it ties into the thing, but it also ties in kind of badly because it is the old horror trope of, well, do we really want to know how the monster that we are operating with really works? Like,
True.
I know a lot of people complain that they made the thing like a weirdo alien, sort of. I haven't watched the
Uh,
sequel to the thing. I only seen like a
no,
couple of videos riffing on it. Been a while,
it
but that's
doesn't
for another.
really. I didn't feel like that, at least. It's just that the pacing is a little bit different than the first movie, but that's also kind of understandable because the original movie took like almost like 40 minutes to build up to the point where you finally first see the thing. But we already know what the thing is now in the 2000s. So there's no point in having that same build up again. But yeah, I do agree. It doesn't tie in perfectly, but I do think it was a very honest attempt that ended up being entertaining enough for me. And so that's a example of at least a good late sequel in terms of I can respect that. Blade Runner, the new one, obviously good one for me. Uh, I see in your list, the Hylian, I can see Toy Story 3. You
Yeah.
think, what is your reasoning for that one?
So Toy Story 3 is don't I'm hope you're not confused with the fourth one, because the fourth one is where I think that the late sequel play kind of shows up. But Toy Story 3 is an interesting case because Toy Story 2, you basically didn't have a plan for a sequel back then. Like, it seemed like the story with Woody, and both Woody and Buzz in the first two films, they went through their own kind of existential reevaluation of who they are. Like in the first film, Buzz learns that he is a toy, he's not the Space Ranger. And Woody in the second one, while he knows he is a toy, he never really knew what like where he came from. Like he's a toy of what, and then he realizes there's this whole legacy behind him, and he comes to the conclusion that he is still a toy, and there is a much larger importance to bring happiness to kids, to the ones who loved him all this time. And it seemed, and they also brought new toys into the mix, like Jesse and the horse. I forgot the name, but but still, like they brought new toys that made that really had a good chemistry with the cast. Toy Story 3 came out, and I know a lot of people reference how sad the ending of the film is, because of how dramatic it all went as the story moved along. Like the toys were almost at the brink of death. Like we've never seen that kind of stuff before. But
Yeah.
but Toy Story
It was
3.
kind of close, to be honest. In Toy Story 2, at least.
Oh yeah, that's true. But like Toy Story
Like
I
the
3.
section
wasn't.
where they almost fall off an elevator, like,
Yeah,
oh
yeah,
Oh
god.
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's true.
Well, I didn't actually feel that way because like, yeah, it looks sad, but they will probably survive. Like it's just
Eventually,
it's
yeah.
most, yeah, it's mostly the ending that is sad, because when the first Toy Story came out, I was about as old as Andy was,
Yes,
and then
that.
when the third came out,
Yeah.
well, I was a little bit older, but he's going to college. He's a man now, and you're like, man, this feels like it's stuck with me.
Yes, yes, yes.
You know,
It's part of the reason why I'm gonna be honest here with you guys and everyone watching. Like sometimes I get emotional watching movies, and Toy Story 3 was one of those, because part of what you said actually, Don. Like, and I think it was a conscious decision from the creators to make Andy age almost like it followed the years of production from Toy Story 1 through 3. Like people
yeah.
who watched Toy Story 1 were kids, almost at the same age as Andy. But then when they watched Toy Story 3, like I was also like on path to college as well. So that really hit me hard. And I think that the thematics of the film and how the characters acted, like it felt like a very natural continuation from Toy Story 2, while also um, really bringing back that idea of the importance of a family bond and love that toys might have to people, like the importance of childhood to people to really grow into adulthood, right? And that maybe not, we don't necessarily need to bring everything of childhood with us. And sometimes there are missions that some of these agents, like these toys, have to bring happiness to other people. And I think that the ending is extremely powerful because of it. Like you see Andy playing with Woody and Buzz for the last time. It's extremely emotional to me just thinking
Yes.
about it.
Oh,
But like you can feel that they really cared about the characters and the people watching, like they gave a crap about really maintaining consistency with the characters, the theming, and the tone. Like like they were aiming at a more adult audience, and that's why the tone of the film is also in a way a lot more adult. I don't
Yeah.
think
Like,
it's a
my
surprise that Toy Story 3 was also like the third film in history, third animated film in history to be nominated for Best Picture. Like it really landed, like it
it
was
did.
very widespread, like even among adults. So it's insane how impactful that film is. It's a masterclass in late sequels, which is one of the reasons why
yeah.
I wanted to put Toy Story into the list, is because Toy Story 4 is also a late sequel and does everything opposite to what Toy Story 3 did. But we'll get there eventually. Sorry, you were gonna say something, Xander.
Yes. I gotta admit, my experience with Toy Story 3 was pretty strange. Like, because I wasn't born in the 90s. I only got to experience Toy Story like much later. So I didn't experience Toy Story 3 as a late sequel. I'm pretty sure I watched like Toy Story 1 and 2, and then like a year later, Toy Story 3 came out, and I just didn't get it. I watched it as a teen, and I didn't like it anywhere near as much as the first two. It was only 2 years later I recognized its merits a lot more. And hey, they made me care about Andy. That really counts for something.
Oh, there you go.
It's very impressive.
Well,
Uh,
that's what I meant at the beginning, is that the audience on an individual level is going to experience anything completely different. In your case, Xander, with
yes.
Toy Story,
I
like,
think it's a late sequel in weirdly the best way possible because it knows it's one. It tries its best to be one, but if you don't experience it that way, you may not get it. At least that was my experience with it at first.
but it's
Now I think
still
it's a pretty good
overall and a
movie.
fun. It's still overall a fun movie to enjoy, even if you didn't grow up with Toy Story. But like that whole coming of age kind of arc that movies have. Imagine like I don't know if you guys are fans of the Harry Potter movies, but that's like another one of those examples of I was the same age as those actors when those movies started. I was the same age when the movies ended, and it felt like one huge journey was finally done. But anyone who's going to pick up the Harry Potter movies today and just binge watch all six of them or seven of them, just all of them in a row, they're not going to have the same experience because for them it's just next movie, next movie, next movie, next movie, and we're done.
Yes.
Uh, and
I
we
think
had to actually wait, and we saw these characters grow up every year or 2 years. We had to wait for the next one,
mhm.
and we grew with them.
I think it is something I think I've said before where I say that people that are by far the most invested, be it either in a hatred sense or a loving sense, are the ones that say the most strong things about something. And in that sense, it's like if you didn't grow up with Star Wars, you're not going to have like that much of an opinion on the sequel trilogy or the prequel trilogy or anything like that, which
Yeah.
is part of why I think the sequel trilogy kind of did well still, because it's been so long since Star Wars came out, like almost 50 years nowadays, and the audience, the original audience, just kind of moved on a long time ago for the most part. There's still tons of people that grew up with it. Like I still see like 20-something-year-olds that say, "Oh, I grew up with Star Wars. I watched the prequels. I watched the OT. I bought the toys. I bought the 15 games from the expanded universe." Because there were so many games for Star Wars during like 2000 to 2005 was insane.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the people that went through that, when they got the sequel trilogy, they are just going to be like, "Wow, what is this?"
Yeah.
They're just going to hate it because the investment they have is so strong. It's basically going to make them have far stronger reaction to the sequel trilogy.
Yeah, this is why I
Oh, for
think
sure.
that late sequels are also a very peculiar kind of art because they carry a very important
Yes,
a very
like
important
I do not
responsibility.
envy. Yes, I do not envy anyone that is making a late sequel. I wouldn't want to be in their spot.
Yeah, because it's a really tough situation. Like you really need to owe up to the folks who really love it passionately, and the fact that you're bringing back something that they thought was over, and you need to justify that it needs to exist. Like that's a major challenge for artists. So yeah, I
Oh
think
yeah.
that's something that Toy Story 4, Toy Story 3 went through this experience. Toy Story 4 went again, and I left the theater thinking like, yeah, this didn't need to exist. like,
Well, yeah, that's the problem. You feel you and me who felt like completed after three were like
yeah,
it doesn't have to exist. But
yeah,
to be fair, I did like Toy Story 4. I enjoyed it, and it felt to me like a new saga just started. And the original saga, the first three will forever be just that, its own little thing. I feel the same way about the Pirates of the Caribbean. Like the first three movies are like one thing, and everything that came after it, I haven't even watched half of it. I think it just exists in its own world for me, and maybe it's for the new people who come in, but for me, the original three are fine, and that's how I will always remember them. So for Toy Story 4 is understandable. It's too profitable to to retire, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah,
I am
I
saddened.
think my it's just that I have issues with the film taking these characters and putting them in scenarios where I don't believe that they would act the way they do. Like Woody is such a pinnacle, like an epitome of valuing the importance of being there for your loved ones, like for your, not just for your loved ones, like as brothers or as like husband and wife, but like as a family. He throughout the first three films, his entire arc was understanding the value of being a toy to a child, and it felt very. I just couldn't believe that he would leave the little girl in favor of going out in the world with Bo Peep. You know, I would assume like from his entire history up to that point, his values are very clear, and in the same way that he tried um, to convince Jesse to live with him and create a new life with Andy after she suffered her history with her original owner, and even Toy Story 3 with Lotso Bear. Like he even tried to redeem the villain. Try listen. We have someone that could love you. Like it's important to we have a role in in children's lives. I'm sorry. So uh, I didn't see anything that in the film that actually made that challenge to his values that would justify his final decision in the film making sense. And in the same way that Buzz Lightyear, he kind of returned in a way to his position in Toy Story 1. And it kind of felt also like a little nostalgia nod where he is trying to struggle with his toy identity. He never really relied so heavily on his own internal voices. Like he presses the button and there's this pre-recorded line from the show, etc. Like he didn't he already overcame that before. But in Toy Story 4, he is so reliant on this part of his existence now, and there is no bridge connecting the films to really justify how much these characters changed. And I think this is something that is very common among all bad sequels that I would list here, right? I listed the Matrix Resurrections, like Matrix 4. There is this very immense disconnect between Matrix 3 and 4. The Force Awakens. So you mentioned as well, Don, about how the sequel trilogy kind of revamped Star Wars in that sense, and they were trying something new despite not having a clear direction. But The Force Awakens, in a lot of ways, is basically A New Hope. It's
Yes.
it's narratively structured
Like
and designed to
he
really incite memories of A New Hope. They're just ordered differently in the film, but it's fundamentally a film that is designed to be safe as much as possible, not committing to the new story beats, because they would leave everything for Ryan Johnson in The Last Jedi to fulfill all of those criteria. So it's in a way, The Force Awakens is a remake of A New Hope, but the curse of being a remake of A New Hope is that the state of the galaxy would need to be reset in a way. So when you talked about the Mandalorian bridging these two, it would be much better if they actually started with the event of the Mandalorian, regardless of its quality. Okay, like I don't think necessarily that the Mandalorian is all that great, but if they actually started working on something that would provide this bridge in the transformation of the state of the galaxy and how Luke Skywalker disappeared, etc. And it would make a lot more sense. People would be a lot more forgiving, and the craft would be a lot better made if there were better connecting tissues between the films. Like we wouldn't be like, where did the First Order came from? Like how did they become as powerful as they are now? They're even stronger than the Empire in a
Yeah.
span of time that was much shorter than the creation of the Empire itself. So
The,
there is this.
to be fair, they
Yeah.
did do the same type of thing in the prequel trilogy as well, though.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
we end up in like, oh, the Clone Wars has begun, and then the next movie they're just subtly
It starts at
clones
the end.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And like, it wasn't until years later that they were like, we're gonna make a Clone War series that's gonna tie the whole thing together, and it's gonna make more sense now. And
Actually, no, because there was a 2003 Clone Wars series that was released between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith that was made to tie them up. They
Yeah.
just made another series about it.
but that's not the yeah, okay, that's not the clone. Well, but
Yeah.
still, like, they could have made a fourth movie in between that, or have the
Well,
Clone Wars be more focused on the actual Clone Wars,
yes,
or
but
the rise of it.
the thing
Well,
is, even if the prequels did it, that doesn't change anything really, because that is the thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
well,
that
that
would
that
just mean
just
that prequels
shows
are
the
bad also.
to me, that kind of just shows the nature of Star Wars. They tend to make time jumps, and they don't really know exactly what to do with it. And then they bring out games and comic books and
Oh,
other
oh yeah,
series,
I will
and those
absolutely agree
kind of,
because
yeah,
like
those kind
even
of
in the
weave it all together.
OT, it was like uh they said something along the lines that the Death Star almost bankrupt the entire empire in the making, and it's like, okay, I get it. And then it's destroyed, and then a sizable amount of time passes between A New Hope and Empire, and it's like, okay, so the Empire is better now. Like, okay, I can buy that. And then fucking Return of the Jedi is just like, oh, we're making a new Death Star, and I'm like, how? Hey,
How
you
Yeah.
almost bankrupted yourself. How the hell are you doing this?
Yeah.
Why the hell are you doing this?
That's
Why is it bigger and better?
yeah. That's something that,
Uh,
that I would see as a story flaw in that aspect. But the thing that the difference
like
between the
yes,
by the
prequels
way,
and the
like yes, I
yeah,
agree. It's a thing Star Wars does somewhat often, but that doesn't still doesn't excuse it. And it is like I said, people have had a stronger reaction to that over it on the OT because they already had an investment that built up over many, many years for Star Wars. And so a flaw like that would be seen as just insane.
yeah, and the prequels
Can
also
I
got
can
that.
I can I quickly say I
Of
have
course,
to quickly go to the bathroom. I will come back and then we can talk more Star Wars.
of
But
course, of course, of
Sure.
course.
I will be back in a few minutes.
All right, I'll take the opportunity to do the same actually. So yeah, I'm back, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello.
Hello.
Monster Mage still isn't back though.
Man, I will say though, this has been an interesting conversation up until now. But one thing that I will say is that we've spent a lot more time on these topics than I thought we were, which is actually a good thing in my opinion. I thought the stream would be a lot shorter, like, but
Oh,
uh,
I've barely spoken, so
yeah.
yeah, it's good.
But yeah, like I feel it's interesting to talk generally about art like this, because then you end up summoning different types of works and try to highlight what made them work and what made them fail in some form or another, and we end up learning a lot from that. But and actually, I'm waiting for you to uh, give more of your insights on Mega Man 11 specifically, since it's something that you are pretty passionate about as well. But yeah,
I'm
Yes,
back, by the way.
I am very passionate about the series.
yeah,
Like, I played most commercially released Mega Man games, and it's hard to understate just how many there are. You have eight, no, nine Mega Man X games. You have the 11 Classic Series games. You have what else? the four Mega Man Zero games, the two ZX games.
Yeah,
I'm currently playing through the Battle Network games. I finished the first Mega Man Star Force. Like there's so many.
yeah. So yeah. Oh, and by the way, hi Don, welcome back.
Hello.
So yeah. So you want to you wanted to continue on on the Force Awakens, etc. Yeah.
I was
Well,
saying that regardless of how Star Wars did it, that the fact that the sequel trilogy still does it, and it's going to draw more ire by it from people because of the passion people have for the series, and because of the fact that uh, it is being held to such a standard that it's a little bit unrealistic. I would admit, like there was no chance in hell Force Awakens was ever going to be perfect, but people at least expected them to bridge the gap better, like way better.
Yeah. So what were you
Which,
going to say, Don?
in a-
well, my general thing that I wanted to cover is not necessarily tied to one specific franchise, but many.
Yeah.
And that is that we as critics kind of underestimate how incredibly difficult it is to create a story that stays consistent over multiple generations.
100%.
Even even Tolkien was not able to do that, which is I think probably the gold standard when it comes to world building. The amount of detail that he put in his stories was to this day was
I
still unmatched like by any means it's unmatched how much detail he put into his world, but even he couldn't keep it consistent. The original Hobbit was never meant to tie into the Lord of the Rings. It was a self-contained story. The magic ring that Bilbo found, now we all say, oh, it was the One Ring, but that was not originally what he intended. So what did he do? He made appendices. He made the Silmarillion. He made all kinds of little notes and just like madman scribbles all over the place that kind of tied all the stuff together. And it's on one hand it's understandable that we as fans of a series crave that type of consistency, but the fact that it's never been done before kind of speaks volumes on how hard it really is to write a story that spans like beyond the universe that you're creating at that moment in time. um, it's just very very difficult, and we tend to give creators a hard time for that, like filmmakers and story writers a hard time for that. But there's a reason why so many franchises go to waste at some point, because it's just very hard to keep it up. Someone starts the whole thing, someone writes a story, and someone picks up the torch gets passed on later down the line. Those people have no idea what to do with it anymore, so they write in their own type of lore. Just as a very crude example, just look at the vampire lore. Vampires started out as this thing. Oh, they cannot handle sunlight, and they cannot handle crucifixes. But over the many decades that vampires have existed, people keep changing the lore and adding things. Suddenly, they're also vulnerable to running water or to like silver bullets, even though that's werewolves. But apparently, that works on vampires too. We're just making it up as we go along. Same goes with the Metal Gear Solid franchise. Like the stories just kept getting more ridiculous and more ridiculous, and at some point it was like just one giant tinfoil hat conspiracy. It's
yeah.
so incredibly difficult to
Oh,
write a story that just keeps going and will remain its consistency, keep its consistency and its quality all over the place. So it I think it's a good thing that we as fans try to hold creators to a certain standard, but it's also kind of toxic in a way that we expect so much from human beings who are just creating stuff and they're just going along with it, you know?
Yeah,
yeah.
I
Well, I will say
Mm-hmm.
I am not that big of fan of Star Wars. Uh, I do not dislike the sequel trilogy as heavily as many other people do. I don't think even the original trilogy is that good, to be honest. And I just hold them
Same.
to the same standards I hold pretty much everything else at that point. So to me, even though I know it's very hard, it's still something that I criticize regardless.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's good to criticize stuff.
and I understand. And by the way, what you said, Don. I agree that there are a lot of people out there that forget just how hard it is to actually craft an expanded universe like this. Uh, I uh, I hope nobody is actually demanding perfection, like expecting that perfection would come out. It's just
Uh,
that a lot of
well,
people
there is always
really hope
some
that
person that does, to
the
be fair.
work really has like some a good, at least there might show up some inconsistencies, but hopefully those inconsistencies aren't that fundamental, because in order for the audience to really get engaged and invested is usually tied to the amount of immersion that one gets, and of course that's subjective, but there are many studies surrounding the ideas of immersion in art, and a lot of that has to do with like specific normative standards in terms of like how do you build your story on your craft. There might be some small little details that might be off, but at least the fundamental ones, like in storytelling, you need to at least make a bridge that is coherent, that actually, like, you can skip some parts. So like we were talking about Star Wars, like from episode 4 to 5, like from A New Hope to Empire Strikes Back, there is a time skip, but at least the characters aren't that different. You look at Luke Skywalker in Empire Strikes Back, and you look at A New Hope, like you see that it's the same character, just slightly more mature, and there isn't a drastically different set of values that the character has. And the state of the world is also, logically speaking, like it makes sense that the Empire, after losing the Death Star, etc., that they would strengthen their forces and try to repel the rebels and etc. Like there is a state of the world that they try to really make a consistent bridge. And from episode 2 to 3, in the prequels, like I agree with you that there is actually a very large time leap, and it's something that I'm not necessarily a fan of, but at least I understand while watching episode 3 after
Oh,
2 that you can get that Anakin is more mature, that some events that are relevant to this film are mentioned. Like everything in episode 3, almost like you can actually trace back to something else that they've mentioned before, most things. But
Mm.
but that's the thing. But in episode 7, in The Force Awakens, there is such a violent change in world building and characters, and we have little to no information explaining all of it, and a lot of that was left to The Last Jedi to actually explain everything. And a lot of people got mad at The Last Jedi precisely because it had all this burden. I actually feel sorry for Ryan Johnson in that aspect. Like a lot of critics actually expected they actually had unrealistic expectations for the film, because they really, the film really had to make up for actually two films in one. So, and
Well, I mean, I might say something that a lot of people are gonna give me a lot of flack for, but
no, feel free, man.
uh,
Here, this place here is for people to really express what they feel.
oh, don't worry about it,
You
man.
shouldn't
People
feel
call me a
afraid.
contrarian all the time. You
Yeah,
deal with it.
seriously, like
okay.
feel free. Like nobody is gonna judge you.
Well, to me, The Last Jedi proved that Star Wars fans are not ready for a mature take on the Star Wars franchise. Yeah, the game has flaws. It has some like pacing issues, but the fact that people were so hung up on the fact like, oh, why did they kill Snoke so early? Why was Rey a nobody? Why was this? Why was that? But if you actually listen to what Ryan Johnson has to say about why he made those decisions, it makes so much sense. He wanted to break the conventions of Star Wars. It doesn't always have to be a Skywalker, it doesn't always have to be a Palpatine or like any of the big families that these series are created around. He wanted to reinvent the whole idea that everybody can be force sensitive. Everybody that anybody can get born, and they happen to have like a connection to the force, because the force used to be something magical that could just happen. Um, it wasn't always tied to you have to be a Skywalker in order to use the force, or you have to be a Jedi even to use the force. Everybody uh, complained when they included the midichlorians in the prequel series, because it took away a lot of the magic of suddenly it was something scientific, something that could be measured inside of your blood type or whatever the hell they were going with back then. Um, and this movie kind of just did away with that, and they were like, um, there's a myth surrounding Luke Skywalker. And the reality is, he was just a guy who happened to have been powerful by with the Force because of his lineage, blah 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 blah. And at some point, he had the how do you call it? The naive thought that he could reinvent the Jedi Order, and then he ended up finding out that it didn't really work that way. Someone is always going to be pulled to the dark side at some point. It happened to have been his nephew. And then a lot of people say, well, he shouldn't have tried to kill Kylo Ren. Well, first of all, he didn't, because it's not in his character. And second, he um it's so hard to explain it from the top of my head, but it's like Luke's character arc in The Last Jedi makes so much sense to me, because I am in my mid 30s now. I'm old compared to some other Zelda creators and some other people who make content. I'm quite old. I know exactly how it feels to fail at stuff and how you can get set back to a certain point. And that's what Ryan Johnson says in his interviews. He says, if you look at the story of King Arthur, all we know is the moment he pulled the sword out of the stone and suddenly he became the king of England, and he was like this mythical figure. But his life went way beyond that point. Then he started getting into middle age, and he had to deal with all kinds of other problems, and then he had to start worrying about his own age and mortality, and then you start figuring out, yeah, he is not some sort of perfect figure that everybody adores. He has its own struggles, and it makes him more human as a person. And so I never understood why people hated Luke in the Last Jedi so much in the way he acts, because he did everything he thought was right. I'm gonna build a new Jedi Order. I'm gonna do it right this time. And suddenly he figured out, the Jedi were wrong all this time. They were a bunch of power hungry, like, forgive my French, like assholes who try to rule the galaxy and try to be some sort of secret police for the Republic, and they failed. And now I have to deal with this stuff, and now my own nephew is being pulled to the dark side. Of course, he's gonna become like depressed about it, And that's good story building. That's good character building to me. And I guess a lot of people just didn't get that, and they didn't get the fact that Snoke was killed so early, even though he was just supposed to be a roadblock for Kylo Ren to finally understand, like, I don't need you anymore. You're not my boss. I'm gonna do this all my way. So I don't know. I think The Last Jedi is probably the best Star Wars movie after the Empire Strikes Back. To be that's just my opinion, and Revenge of the Sith.
Well,
That's an interesting take.
that's no,
Well, the
yeah.
first argument that I know of is that, first off, it is a nice sentiment. that he tried to make things different. That is cool, but that doesn't
Hmm.
mean anything. It doesn't mean that what he did was any good. It just means that it is what he did. Nice sentiments, cool,
Hmm.
but
Don't get me wrong, by the way, just to clarify, I don't like Ray's story arc. I don't like Finn's story arc. I have lots of problems with the sequels. It's just that the attempt that was there by Ryan Johnson, I can respect it.
You
I think it's
like the
like
messaging
yes,
of
there is
the
a
plot A, right? Like specifically with Luke Skywalker and how it relates to Snoke, etc. Right? That's what you found more
yeah.
resonance. Yeah,
I think Ray's story arc is terrible. Well, it was okay until it was like, oh, she's a Palpatine. Okay, there we go. So it's a legacy character again. So you have to be related to one of these big, powerful families or big characters from the past in order to even matter in this universe anymore. I'm sorry, but then everybody is an NPC, and it's only about the Skywalkers, the Palpatines, and all those people that matter. You have to be that's what I hated about the original The Force Awakens. Everybody was theorizing, oh, Rey is probably related to Obi-Wan. Oh no, or maybe she's related to this person or this. Like, do people always need to be related to something to someone to matter in this universe, or can someone just come from nowhere and matter and still make a big impact? No,
well,
well,
part
apparently
of it
not
is
because
that when people saw Rey, they also wanted to know why is she so powerful, why is she so good at the things she does, and a shitty
yeah,
but somewhat acceptable answer would have been, oh, she's related to one of these key figures, and a lot of people just theorize that.
yeah.
I don't
I
think it
think
really
that a lot of
changes anything.
mhm.
Like, oh, you could say she's the daughter of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, I don't care. She's still like absurd as a character.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with that, but Anakin was the first Skywalker to be. Someone had to be the first, right? Who was like just really freaking force sensitive and be really powerful for no apparent reason. I know there's some
Well, there is a
theory.
kind of.
I know there's theories like
Oh, it's
Anakin
not
was
just
conceived
theory.
by the
It is.
Force.
Yeah.
It is strongly implied that Anakin's existence is not natural, and he was made the way he is.
Oh yeah, but sure, but then you can go even further back. Like, so who was the first Palpatine? Why is Palpatine so powerful, or why is
We
Obi
don't need
Wan
to know.
so
The story
like?
is
Why
not
is
about.
huh?
Uh, we do not need to know since this story is not about him. The story is about this guy called Anakin Skywalker. Why does he exist? Oh, okay, it's this. He's force sensitive. Like, okay, I get it. And then he trained and he did all this stuff. Like, okay, I get it.
No, I think
Makes sense.
this
Yeah, yeah.
this can
I
also
I I
extend to the villains as well. Like I think what Don is saying is also relevant. Like you don't need to know everything about the villain, but like there are certain things like where did this guy come from? Like it's also why a lot of people were mad with Snoke being dead, specifically because at the end of the day there was so much hype around him and there was so much background like
Well,
he
to
influenced a
me,
lot and he simply went away with no explanation of where he came from and why was he so powerful. At the end of the day it's kind of related in that aspect.
Oh, he wasn't powerful.
like,
That's the whole thing about Snoke. He wasn't supposed to be powerful. He was just like Kylo Ren was just a Darth Vader wannabe. He was just a Palpatine wannabe, but he thought he knew everything, but he ended up getting betrayed by his own pupil, which, by the way, happens all the time with the Sith. I'm just saying, when it comes to powerful characters, there's always someone who has to be the first, and it doesn't always have to be explained why they are so powerful. Why is Yoda so incredibly powerful? We don't know because we don't even know the name of his race at this point.
well,
That
yes.
that that
But in
that
this
is
case, with Rey specifically, it is important because she's very powerful for no apparent reason and with no training, which is something we know that is needed for you to become powerful in this universe. So just the fact that like Palpatine is extremely old, make it follows that he would be extremely strong in the Force at least.
yeah, yeah. No, well, I agree with that. I'm just saying that um, there's always going to be someone who's first. Um, so why couldn't Ray have been the first? And she's not related to anyone, and
Oh, no,
that's
I
what
agree.
Ryan
It could
Johnson.
be. Like, like I said, I don't like the idea of people being like, "Oh, let's just band-aid this food together by saying Ray is the son of someone important." Like, no, she can be the first. The problem would be that she's just insanely good for no reason.
Yeah.
If she
Well,
was good, like she had training, it wouldn't matter. She came from nowhere because
I,
that is not
I
a.
don't think that the problem is the fact that she is powerful for no reason. I think the problem is that she has no flaws as a character. Uh, every character
I
needs
do think that is
flaws.
goofy also together at that point.
Yeah, she never fails. She's always the perfect woman, always the perfect character. Everything always works out in her way, and she has no downfall moment. She has no moment of weaknesses. She's just always there, and she solves everything. And that's what I don't like about Ray, and that's what I really like about Anakin is that he is powerful, but he's also temperamental, and he's also very impatient, and that's what ultimately leads him to the dark side because he's a good guy in the first two movies. You can see that he's doing what he does for just even in the third movie, which is when he turns into Darth Vader, he still contemplates turning Palpatine over to the Jedi Council.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in fact he does, but he makes up his mind because of personal reasons, like this guy might be the last. Obviously, because he's been indoctrinated, he thinks he is the last chance he has at saving Padme, even though that's exactly what leads to her death. But he doesn't know that. Luke also has its moments where he goes to Cloud City and he's like, "I'm gonna wreck shit. I'm gonna make everybody. I'm gonna show people what I'm truly made of." And he ends up getting completely destroyed by Vader. Gets his arm cut off. Half of his friends get trapped or get destroyed. He messes up. He thinks he's ready. He thinks he can negate his training with Yoda and just go save his friends. Turns out he was completely wrong. Ray doesn't have that from the very first movie until the very last moment. She always makes the right decisions. She never fails. She doesn't know what defeat is, and that's what I don't like about Ray.
Yes, I
Understandable.
would agree with most of that. Yes,
Yeah. Guys,
Yeah.
we got a little bit sidetracked by Star Wars.
you
Yeah,
expect.
well, we can maybe organize a roundtable on just Star Wars, and then that would be even more fun, honestly, because this series has a lot to like. It's a series that has such a long-lasting impact on art creation. Like a lot of people look at Star Wars as a reference for like character writing, etc. A lot of artists are inspired by Star Wars ever since the 70s. Like Final Fantasy VII, which is the work that I'm covering in my channel currently. Like I'm making a chronological breakdown of the original game, and it's also its sequel is actually in the banner here, but like
Yeah.
it's also a work that is extremely influenced by Star Wars as well. Like, and so I think it would be interesting. So here's an invitation if you guys are
I think
interested.
that there is a good reason why Star Wars is probably one of the most prominent examples of this kind of stuff, these kinds of subject matter, because it is one of those few stories that started out so long ago and is still running today. How many series can you actually say that about?
Yeah,
A lot of series go lost in translation, or they just quit altogether. At
exactly.
some point, it just stops. This is a very. It probably spans some of the most time, uh, and even the sequels, or sorry, not the sequel trilogy. The prequel trilogy was a late sequel because it took a long time for the Phantom Menace to come out, and then after the prequel trilogy was finally finished, we had the Disney era, which is also a late sequel. So it's one of a few examples of a series that has had multiple late sequels.
I think
Hello?
I think that the better, the biggest example of this as well, outside of Star Wars, would be probably the Terminator, right? Because also after two, like two was probably like one of the very first late sequels to exist, and afterwards, like Terminator 3 was basically a late sequel to 2. Terminator 4
Yeah.
was a late sequel to 3. Like every
What did you think of um what is it called again? For
wait,
Salvation.
Salvation. It
What do you,
was
what did you think of Salvation?
it was it wasn't
I
the
Because I
best crafted
feel
one, but out of the sequels after 2, I think Salvation might be the one I'm the more favorable towards. What
I
about
like
you?
Salvation more than 3.
Oh yeah, me too, me too, me too.
Because Salvation was basically the story we wanted to see ever since 2. Like,
Exactly.
okay, the whole time travel stuff, fine, we get it. You're trying to prevent Judgment Day, but now let's focus on that actual war that was going on back then. I want to see post-apocalyptic world with these Terminators running rampant, and the world is already fallen. I want to see that, and that is what Salvation was. Was it executed perfectly? No, but it was still close enough to what I imagined a world like that to look like, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree in that regard. Like the idea of Terminator 4 actually exploring this part of the timeline is interesting. I just had my issues with basically like the execution more than anything else. Like I think the story idea, at least it's in the right place.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Like
like
I said, it was not executed perfectly, but it was as close as I could imagine a world like that to be, I guess.
yeah.
That's what I'm trying. Every other movie just tries to rehash what has already been done before. It's like, especially Terminator 3. I hate that movie because it just completely invalidates 2. It's
Yeah,
like, oh,
I agree.
the
100%.
yeah, because at least with Salvation, you could say, well, uh, that's the future that they didn't prevent. We get to see what happened in that time. It doesn't destroy 1 and 2, um, but 3 just flat out says, "Yeah, I know you guys destroyed all the Skynet stuff, but it doesn't matter. Here's another. It's still gonna happen either way." And the movies after that, don't even get me started on Dark Fate because
Yeah.
oh that movie is the bane
Yeah.
of my existence.
Yeah, I think Genesis and Dark Fate are neck and neck for me. Like, which one's worse? I actually can't even tell. Maybe it's Dark Fate actually. Not that I think
Genesis
about it.
was at least more fun
Yeah, yeah,
and lighthearted.
yeah. But I think that there is something common between these late sequels, like the for Terminator specifically compared to like Terminator 2. Like Terminator
Mm.
2, it came from the same guy, came from James Cameron. Like they looked at the success of the original, and they said, "Wow, okay, people are interested in this. Is there any potential for storytelling here and something extra? How can we actually make it fresh while also making it in a way that fans of the original are a fan of? Like they would love this. Like how would that happen?" And they took the original Terminator's role in the story and turned it upside down. Now the Terminator that was actually the bad guy, he is actually someone who is actually helping our heroes, etc. And changed. It's kind of like the Empire Strikes Back of Terminator. Actually, like a lot of the world building ideas of like how characters relate to each other, they they are twisted, like they are turned upside down, but in a way that when you watch the film, it really makes sense. Like it is believable that these things are happening, and the characters feel
Oh
like
yeah.
John Connor's emotional relationship with a Terminator that originally was, it's not the same T800, but like the fact that there is this guy, this robot that was originally designed to kill his mother, is actually working with them, and he is earning a sense of humanity. He can't cry, but he learned, like, his thumbs up was extremely emotional because it showed that he was actually learning how to earn that humanity, that feeling that he was struggling to understand throughout the film. So it takes the concepts of the original, and while they aren't exactly the same, it's basically a natural evolution of that content. But I think that
Yeah.
Terminator 3 and onwards, they basically, instead of looking at the story, like the characters and the world, they look more at the legacy, like what does this mean for the audience, and let's try to revamp this in a way that we can get people back in theaters. Like every time that it fails, they try to reboot it in some way. Like every Terminator after
Yeah.
three, it's kind of basically been like this, right? They try to put it a final, give a sense of finality to the story, but people aren't happy, so they're like, man, okay, guys, just give me one more chance. I swear we're gonna make the best film ever. You're gonna love it, okay? Just trust us. This time we're gonna do it. And they've been doing this for like 5 times now, 4 times, and
That's what's ridiculous about it is that this is the kind of quality you expect from a slasher horror movie. You know, Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees always gets killed at the very end, but you know he's somehow survived and they're going to make another one. But that was not the original intent with Terminator. The first two Terminator movies worked so well because yeah, they stopped the Terminator at the in the first movie, but someone is still going to invent that technology. In fact, his skeleton is still trapped under that like pressure what is that called, that thing?
in the
Compressor, I
factory,
think.
the compressor, yeah.
Yeah, the compressor. Like that someone's going to take that, someone's going to see that and it's going to be like, "Huh, this is like super advanced technology. We can rebuild this." And lo and behold, that's how Skynet gets like its inception. That's how it gets built. So that story arc made sense because the technology is still there. The person who will invent that technology is still there. So in the second movie, they're like, all right, if we really want to stop this from happening, we gotta kill the person who does it, who actually invents this technology, and destroy any trace of this technology, so nobody can think of this. They don't end up killing the guy who did because they have mercy, but they persuade him to never, like, they persuade him to not chase after this technology ever again. They destroy every trace of the Terminator this time. Done. That should be the story. If you want to make any more movies after that, it should have been in the past, or sorry, in the like far in the future, because obviously you can with Zelda like timeline splits. You can technically say, well, that future has already happened. So let's make a movie like Salvation where everything happened the way we know it happened. That's fine. But all the other movies are just like, no, you destroyed all this and you did this, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Doomsday is inevitable. It's like, well, why are we even trying then? Because it's gonna happen either way. Apparently, no matter what we try, it always comes back and it always keeps trying. Which is why I made the example with slasher movies. Why even bother trying to kill this guy? Because you know he's gonna come back in the first movie, and that's just not the type of standard I would hold up Terminator because
I mean,
ah,
yeah.
it's such a good
It,
movie.
Yeah.
if you want to get rid of Jason Voorhees, like tie giant metal balls to him and throw him in the middle of the ocean.
Mm. Like that's also kind of why I don't like time travel that much because it kind of
Yeah,
ruins the whole
yeah.
idea of consequence.
No, like there, it's just that I'm not against time travel. I just think that it's a very difficult writing tool to actually get it right, and a lot of writers just use time travel as a tool for convenience instead of a tool to tell a story. And
Yeah.
this is why I tend to like a lot of like Chrono Trigger, how it handles time travel, and how Ocarina of Time actually handles time travel for Zelda. Like the fact that it actually thought through the way the repercussions of branching timeline paths because of a single decision that defined like Zelda understanding that it's important for Link to not lose a big part of his life, and out of knowing the risks and knowing what he went through to save everyone, like she decides to send him back to the past, like and completely change everything afterwards. Like a lot of details of time travel are actually used as it's used more as it's thought through as a way to convey the story, the characters, and the world, instead of just now conveniently this character from this other timeline pops up, like yeah, like
Well, like Marvel,
yeah,
like the way Marvel does it. Like,
yeah,
oh yeah, every you're gonna kill off half the cast, but we already know that they're gonna time travel and everybody's gonna be alive again
yeah,
because obviously they
Marvel
cannot
films
get
don't
rid of
exist.
yeah. And
like
I think this also extends to dimension travel as well. Like this is why Final Fantasy VII remake, I wanted to go through a roundtable without mentioning this game, but
Dude, you
go
put
for it,
it on the
go for it, man.
thumbnail.
no,
Don't
no,
lie
no,
to
no.
me.
That's Advent Children, sir. That's not Final Fantasy VII remake. But like
Ah,
the
yes,
reason
I
why
hope.
one of the reasons why I am not a fan of the story direction in remake is precisely because instead of being concerned about telling the story of the original, they bring up this idea of dimension travel, that they try to defy fate. They try to create a new story by killing this fate god. And the
Oh,
repercussions of this, they end up going to a different dimension where a crucial character survives instead of dying. Like the reason why, I don't know how much you're well versed in Final Fantasy VII, Monster Don. I don't know how much you're into it.
All I know is that they have those ghosts and they kind of try to push the story in the way that the original was supposed to, and then in the end they defeat it, so that now they suddenly have free will and everything can change and be different.
Yeah,
I think they, I
so
think they
silly.
just, I think they
So
just
fucking
used
silly.
it as a very cheap plot device to be like, hey, it's a remake, but we also want to come up with new stuff and change the story because everybody knows the story of Final Fantasy VII. What is her name again?
Aerith.
Eric
Eris.
dies. Yes.
Yeah,
Eris dies, but maybe not this time
yeah.
because they want to surprise the old school fans too. Because why even play the original anymore? I don't know. I'm
No,
not
yeah.
super invested in Final Fantasy. To be fair, I know all the stories,
Oh, be
and
thankful that you are not invested.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
I think Final Fantasy has some of the worst storytelling in existence, except for the old games
Yeah,
and seven, the original seven.
yeah,
But anything after that, I know a lot of people like 10. I fucking
yeah,
hate 10.
yeah, yeah. Oh my God, thank you, thank you. I
10
have
has so many problems. I don't know why people like it so much.
yeah, Final
I like
Fantasy
10.
X.
It's good.
Like Final Fantasy X has its qualities, but you can tell from a storytelling
Story
perspective.
wise,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
from a
okay.
storytelling
Gameplay,
perspective.
gameplay wise, it's good.
Yeah, yeah, but from a storytelling perspective, you can tell that like the original writers, like Sakaguchi, was a very important director. Like he's the creator of Final Fantasy, right? And he used to supervise the Final Fantasy throughout his career. And 10 was one of the two Final Fantasy games that he didn't supervise much at all. Like he was just credited as executive producer. Storytelling wise, like he barely had anything to do with it. And you can really tell when he is present and when he is not. Not saying that the story is like a one man thing. Like every work of art that is audiovisual, most, not every, but a lot of them are a result of group of teamwork. So I'm not putting all the weight on his shoulders, but it's clear that there is an importance of having a direction. You know, like if you have a good direction, the team works a lot better. And Final Fantasy X, without that direction, it really made a difference. But yeah, like if you knew how things turned with Final Fantasy VII remake, like you would understand a bit of my pain, because Cloud Strife has his role in the story, because a lot of one of the big things that happened in his past is a guy who was a big soldier. Like he was a very important figure, and basically he dies, and
Didn't he?
he gives on.
Did,
Yeah.
didn't he take on like? Wasn't he like taking on someone else's identity?
Yes, yes, he has an identity crisis. Like he assumes the role of this guy that died. And remake, now they transport the party into a universe where the guy who died actually didn't die. So, and this guy was
What is
the
his name again? I
Zax.
forgot.
Yeah, Zax.
Zax,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Now
I
Zax
remember
is.
seeing that scene. I
Yeah.
remember seeing it, like, wait, isn't this the whole reason why
Yeah.
Cloud became who he is? He's like some psycho who took on someone else who's long dead, like took on his identity and
Yeah.
wait, now
Yeah.
he's alive?
Yeah, he's alive now, and all because of dimension travel. So what you said about like investment, like time travel and dimension travel, like when you introduce in a way that's just out of the blue, like investment in the storytelling, like it just goes out the window at this point. Because what's stopping from like another version of like this character showing up and joining the fight? How many copies of like the main villain can show up? Like like there is like one Thanos. Like what's stopping from a Thanos from a different universe to show up and snap his finger again? Like you see what I mean? Like
Exactly.
there needs to be limitations to stories. That's why on a craft level, like there we can separate subjectivity from normativity in that sense. Like there is a historical development of societies creating art, that there are some structural things that need to be set in stone for the work to be better understood and better that tells its story better, like just looking at
Well,
story driven
like
experiences.
like the biggest problem I just have with that in general is that like even Family Guy tried to do a little fake out thing where they kill
Brian,
Brian,
yeah, dude.
one of the main characters,
Yeah.
and then they just bringing back by time travel stuff. At that point, I'm like, well, how are we supposed to relate to this? Because as far as I know, in real life, when someone dies, they're gone. You're not going to get them back. There's no magic wand that you can wave or some machine that you can build. They're dead, and you're not able to see them again, at least not until, who knows, maybe when you die them yourself. That's open for interpretation. But how are we as mortals supposed to, at some point, there is a disconnect between what we experience in the real world and what can happen in those types of universes. Why does it even matter if it's the Dragon Ball Z effect?
Yeah,
Someone dies, oh, you can always wish them back anyway. So
exactly.
why? And it's like, oh no, this person has already been wished back 2 times. Well, let's go to Namek. There's different Dragon Balls there. We can wish them back with those. Like, uh, it just at some point you're like, I can no longer relate to this
Yeah.
because once a character is gone, they are supposed to be gone, Game
Yeah.
of Thrones
I don't
style,
know
and
why
it's
Dragon Ball's even bothers killing its characters. Like,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
just don't kill
Like,
them. It would be so
yeah.
much better if you just didn't.
Yeah. I think the problem,
Well,
like
that's
in yeah.
isn't that one of the reasons why people complained about Game of Thrones at some point, especially in the later seasons? Once someone got killed off, you were like, "Oh, damn, this character's dead.
Yeah.
They're just gone now." And then Jon Snow gets killed, and then he comes back through magic, And it's like, okay, well, apparently it doesn't matter then anymore. Like as soon as you start introducing that kind of stuff where people just can come back through magic or time travel, doesn't matter what kind of plot device it is, if you can bring back people again, the stakes are incredibly low all of a sudden because
Yes.
you no longer have to
It
fear
is
for your
so
favorite
bad.
character.
Like Mass Effect 2, like you guys probably won't know this, but Mass Effect 2 literally starts with Shepard getting like thrown into space and dying, and then they are like 5 minutes later, oh, 2 years have passed. We have literally reconstructed you from your DNA, and I'm like,
Oh,
what? They say
yes.
Yeah.
like, yeah, it was incredibly expensive, like blah blah blah, whatever. Still though, that is just silly.
I
Why
think
would you do that?
I
Are
think
you
that
insane?
the problem with
Couldn't they
this, yeah.
No, I like to uh, agree with Xander. Couldn't they have come up with a different idea in that case? Like, oh no, he got picked up by a ship off
Yeah.
screen or whatever. That anything would have been. It was would have still been cheap, but
Yes.
at
Like
least it would.
I get what they were going for. They were trying to basically make Shepard work for Cerberus, which was kind of a villain faction in one. Like there was no way in hell Shepard wanted to associate with them. The problem is the way they did it was just silly. Like Cerberus just reconstruct him. I'm like, well, you
Yeah,
could have just have like Shepard be branded evil by the government. They are like, okay, no, we don't like you anymore. Fuck off.
No, and
And then
yeah.
imagine
Or
how
hence he had
this.
Cerberus
to
saves him.
begrudgingly side with Cerberus and blah blah blah. Like there's a million ways you could do this, but not this.
And
Yeah, like
imagine.
Cerberus just happened to be in the neighborhood and they saved him or whatever. But now that's the big problem. Now that you know that technology exists, they can reconstruct someone. Why would we even give a shit if someone dies anymore? Because
Yeah.
Yeah.
apparently that
Like
technology
in
exists.
some companion quests, the companion can die, and I'm like, oh hey, can't we just reconstruct him later at some point? Why not?
Yeah,
Yeah,
like when you introduce
exactly.
stuff like this, like it has impact to its world building. I think that's the issue. Like a lot of these writing tools, and late sequels do this a lot, by the way. Like especially those that want to like hit the reset button to try and hit the nostalgia feels. But a lot of the time, like they introduce these mechanics out of the blue that basically have no build up. Like if you have a time travel in your story, like at least tell us the limitations. Like how does it work for us to
Exactly.
understand? For us to understand, like the like what are the stakes, you know? But when you have something like Brian coming back from the dead, like from just out of the blue, like we had no idea that time travel was even possible. Like they just, with all due respect, like they just asspoed this into the story, like just for out of convenience. Like it breaks immersion. That's what I was talking about with regards to like normative understanding of art. Like a lot of this comes into account when you're trying to enhance the immersion of your audience. Your audience loses immersion when they start to understand how contrived it is. Yeah, contrived. That's the word. Like the more contrived the story appears to the audience, the less believable it actually is, because you're starting to see the strings of the puppet master in the story. So like you can see
Yeah,
that there are certain things that just happen because the writer just hit a wall and they just created something new just to solve this problem instead of creatively using the tools that they had before to solve this problem. Like that's, I think, the biggest issue with these writing tools. Honestly, they just introduce this. They do not care for the ramifications of it. It's kind of like we were talking about the sequel trilogy, like the Rise of Skywalker introducing force healing. Like why they didn't think about the repercussions of this. Like why didn't Obi-Wan force heal Qui-Gon, like if that was a real power? Like that why didn't why did Kylo Ren die but Rey like Rey had the power to force heal, right? Kylo did. Why couldn't she save him? Like we don't know the rules, we just know that things just happen.
it's a plot device.
Yeah.
That's all
Yeah.
it is.
Like and to be
Yeah.
fair, like we also don't know exactly how like force push or force whatever works. But at the same time, it's like those abilities are nowhere near as important as force healing
Yeah,
at the same
exactly.
time.
Well, that's the probably the biggest problem. Yeah, I watched a video by one of my favorite creators, Nero,
Oh
and
yeah,
he did kind of showcase the idea that the Force was always meant to be a plot device. You know, they were making it up as they went along. Suddenly they can do that. Suddenly they can do that.
Yes.
Force ghosts were not even a thing until the second movie. So yeah,
Well, they
they
were kind of a
they
thing. You hear Obi-Wan
yeah.
speaking
In
for
A
the
New
Death
Hope,
Star.
yeah. That's
yeah,
true.
of course, but like they were definitely using it as, and there's nothing wrong with that because it's magic, and if you use magic like a magical unexplained thing, it is cool that you expand upon that. I have no problem with that. The problem is when you introduce something so powerful and so potent that it kind of negates anything. Like consequence is out the window at
Yeah,
that point. Like why does it matter if someone dies if you know that they can heal them, but then someone else dies and they just die and you're like, well, why didn't you heal them? Never explained. Just go
People
along
die
with
when
it.
they are killed.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. Like, at least make the rules clear. Either everyone can come back, or like at least Dragon Ball made it clear that you can get wished back twice, like twice, if you, and after that it's game over.
Huh? No. I think some characters die more than twice. I'm pretty sure.
Well, that's introduced
I think
in
what
Dragon
Dragon
Ball
Ball said is
Z.
that you cannot die twice.
Huh?
Like in Dragon Ball, they said, oh, once you're dead in like your ghost form, you cannot be killed again. You're literally like intangible, I guess.
I think the rule was what, like, you can, if you die, you can get wished back. If you die
Yeah.
again after that, you cannot get wished back. You're just dead forever. But then they obviously go to Namek because there's different Dragon Balls there. So, but that was written later. The original Dragon Ball had the original rules, and they kind of made up Namek and the extra Dragon Balls after that. But that's the whole problem with stories is you can keep thinking of ways to fix things, and that's what ruined stuff like Game of Thrones for me. Many people say, well, it was the last season that ruined it, but as soon as Jon Snow got back up, I was like, well, I guess some people have plot armor and they're important enough and popular enough for the show that they can just bring them back. And I kind of get that to a certain extent because that was that's what I mean why it's so contrived and why it's so hard to actually set a boundary because are you guys familiar with The Walking Dead in any way?
No.
Me neither.
No? Well, like The Walking Dead was kind of like that kind of show like Game of Thrones back then where like your favorite character could just die at some point. Um but obviously because it's a grounded series in reality, it doesn't involve magic and stuff like that. Dead is dead. They're not coming back. And the show kind of died because of that. Because they killed off too many favorite characters of people that it genuinely started to cause people to stop watching the series. Like the main character died at some point, then his son, which was supposed to be the follow up of his character, he died. And then people were like, well, why are we even watching the show anymore? All the characters that I once loved and cared about, they're gone now. So I don't care about this show anymore. So I kind of get it why Game of Thrones brought back Jon Snow because he was a very beloved character. So it is a very hard decision to make.
Yeah, I think that's why writers are so important to works like this because they get paid to really try to create, think of creative ways of, if you want this specific character to live, how can you make him survive without making it feel like he is being saved by plot armor? Like this
Yeah.
limitations incentivize creativity, and this is why story problems that show up like this are tend to be much harder to swallow, because and that's what we would consider normatively bad writing, because you can tell that they just instead of using the tools that the own writer established previously, they create a completely new solution that they might not have even thought through its implications to its universe and its characters, and they just use it to for convenience. They save the character that they want, they make events happen the way they should, but it's not organic. And I think that's that's what differentiates the good works from the bad in that sense. And Don, you were talking about how hard it is to continue series like this, and how series that live on for a while, they tend to die like this. But that's
Yeah.
not necessarily something that happens with every franchise that got a sequel. Like the good late sequels proven to be like they are a testament that you can still expand the universe and still take care of details like this. Like you and I both cited Blade Runner 2049. Like
Hmm.
that's a film that was made like over 20 years, like 30 years after the original, and a lot of what happens in the film like are they are kind of it's kind of its own story, but it builds off of the events of the original in a way that you can understand this as the same world, and like the impact of the original events are still felt today. And the story beats of this new one, while it might have a slightly different style from the original, you can still feel very similar beats from the original. And there aren't many instances in the story where you can tell like, man, Deckard here sure had plot armor. Like there are a lot of instances in the film that you watch and you realize, yeah, that's actually reasonable for this to happen. Like maybe he's supposed to die. Yeah, he died here at the end of the film, etc. Like that. Those are the good examples of franchises that eventually get expanded upon. Um, Xander, you can talk about Mega Man 11 as well. Like it's another franchise that, man, the fact that you have like 11 entries in a series, like that's already a
That's really
challenge in
insane.
common.
itself to maintain quality. You know.
Like other
Yeah.
than Final Fantasy, I do not know of any series that got so high in number count, because a lot of series just give up after like 4, 3.
Yeah,
I
but
think
Well,
so. Yeah, I
because
cannot
they
think of
keep
any
doing
other.
the same thing.
Oh, other than like, I think Jason films made up to Jason X, which is 10, I think, or something like that.
Uh,
mm-hmm.
well, in terms of games, like Zelda made it up to 20,
Yeah,
Mario made it up to 20,
Oh,
yeah.
yes, I know.
give
I
or
mean
take.
specifically like
I
number of
was gonna
counts,
say,
as
I was
in
gonna say.
But
yeah.
Assassin's Creed only made it to like 5, and then everybody completely lost interest because they kept doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, so Mega Man 11, really good game. I was honestly impressed with how good it was, and at the same time, it's far from perfect. There are many issues with Mega Man 11. However, I must commend Capcom for actually putting effort into the series again. Like a lot of people have criticized Capcom for not really putting effort into the Mega Man series, and I kind of disagree. Like from 2015 onwards, we got like in 2010 we had the entire RG series comics of Mega Man. There were 55 issues, they were monthly, and those were pretty good. Then in 2015 we got both of the Legacy collections, which were really good. Like, okay, not really good. They launched in bad state from what I remember. They got fixed somewhere down the line, and then we got the Mega Man X Legacy collections, which were decent. We got the Zero Legacy collections, which were great, and then we got Mega Man 11, which is a relatively low budget game, but for what it is, it's really good. I would be willing to say it's probably even the best out of the classic series Mega Man games. The introduction of the double gear system is something that is very new to the series, that makes you really change how you think about any way you tackle these objectives that you can go through. especially since a lot of the level design now is really crazy with a lot of obstacles they throw at you that you really would want to use like speed gear to slow things down. But the nice thing is that you don't need to, so you can beat every level without using the gear system, which may be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your perspective. But I honestly do think it's good because it does allow you to play the game pretty much whatever way you want. I do think they should have nerfed the Buster a little bit and the shop system because you get so much boats in that game, it's ridiculous. But the level design and the way each level differentiates themselves with like their own unique gimmick, like acid mans, little acid spewers that basically create ground you cannot touch if you just let them be and you're not fast enough, and Blockman stage with like some really crazy platforming sections. So I do think it's an excellent game to reintroduce the series. And from what I heard, they are working on the Mega Man Battle Network collection, and they are also working on a new Mega Man game called Mega Man Match, and I hope it's okay at least. And the Battle Network collection will probably be really good also. That is what I would say about Mega Man. It is a really good return so far, and Capcom has done a good job mostly.
And Don, since you love Zelda so much, like Zelda doesn't really have many late sequels. Maybe you could
No.
say like A Link Between Worlds is probably the best one you could come up with. I would say maybe, but um, overall, like there is still a consistent delivery and quality and in its universe. What exactly do you think makes it work? Like, what makes Zelda different from many other IPs that are still long running and also have their own late sequels and struggle, but somehow A Link Between Worlds, for example, turned out to be as good as it is?
Um, I think it's mostly because of quality consistency. Even the worst Zelda games are still pretty damn good compared to most other games. Like the quality is just always, even like I said, even the worst of Zelda games are still a solid 7. So if you maintain that type of quality, people will keep coming back because the gameplay is just really fun. Um, that's one thing, and the second thing is innovation, probably, because if you imagine how much the Zelda series has tried completely different things, how many different types of Zelda games there are, most games would probably not get away with that. But because Zelda has always set itself up from the very beginning, like, hey, every game we're gonna try something new, gonna try something different. So don't expect the exact same Zelda game you got before. That made fans of the series a lot more open to change. Like even from the very beginning, even Zelda 2 compared to the original Zelda was already very,
Yeah.
very different. And they've always kept doing that. Like Wind Waker, the weird change in art style all of a sudden, Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks with the DS D-pad controls. Like it or hate 'em, it was something new that hadn't been tried before. Same thing goes for Skyward Sword with the motion controls, and now Breath of the Wild, first time going open world and actually trying something new to be like, hey, the open world formula has been around for a long time. Let's try something new. Like maybe not everything works, but we will try something new. And lo and behold, like it ended up changing the open world formula forever.
But
Um,
even with these new entries and like looking at how A Link Between Worlds relates to A Link to the Past, for example, like more just looking at
oh
it
yeah,
this more specifically, like do you still see like even with the innovations, etc., like with all the changes, it still feels Zelda, doesn't it? Like it still feels like, yeah, this makes sense to be connected to like A Link to the Past. And even with all the changes, like
yeah.
looking at the series in general, like this still is Zelda, right?
Well, to be fair, the game was originally supposed to be a remake, like a one-on-one
Yeah.
remake. That was the original idea by Miyamoto. But then the team was like, "Well, we can try something different and make it like a soft sequel to it," and that's what happened. Uh, but I think the best thing they did was just acknowledge like this world exists. It's the same world, but you're gonna go through it in a completely different way. You can rent any item. It's just in terms of Zelda, it's always the gameplay that makes the big difference. It's not the story, because the story, let's be fair, it is very similar a lot of the time. Even if it's not, it still is kind of. It
It's
always
very
relates
simple
to
also in general.
very simple. It's a classic good versus evil. Like it doesn't relate to the whole like villains can be relatable. No, in Zelda it's just evil is evil, good is good. It's very black and white. And that's what also makes it fun. It's a classic hero versus evil story. Um, but yeah, I guess gameplay is the reason why that game worked because it's so different. You can tackle any dungeon in any order. You can run items. Um, all the dungeons are different. The overworld is different enough, but still familiar. I think that's why it worked because it doesn't destroy anything. It just adds to it.
Do you think that this is tied to the people working on the game? Like, do you think it's because there were some folks from A Link to the Past involved? Did this influence, or was this like a primordial element for A Link Between Worlds to be as good as it is, or you think that's irrelevant?
I wouldn't know, to be honest. I don't know much about the development cycle of A Link Between Worlds, to be honest. I think they just kept it as true as possible while also trying new things as Nintendo does, because they can never keep it easy or make it easy for themselves. They always want to try something new. And in this case, it ended up setting, I guess, a little bit of the groundwork for Breath of the Wild, for Breath of the Wild, similar to Skyward Sword. Every Zelda game brings a little bit new to the table,
Yeah.
and sometimes it doesn't translate through to the next game. Next game, sometimes it does. It differs.
I asked this question because, like, relating to other late sequels, right? Like, most of the time when we look at late sequels that are that usually we look at it and say, wow, that wasn't very good. If you look into like the development of it, be it a game or film, you'll notice a lot of the fans saying, man, if only the original guys were here, if only like the original creator was here, etc. Like a lot of times uh, people tend to associate the success of late sequels to the presence of the original creators, right?
Hmm.
But uh, yeah, I'm just asking this question to incite, like, in your minds, like, what exactly do you think makes a late sequel good? Like, what exactly, what are the necessary ingredients? You know, is it people? Is it mentality? Is it a particular attention to specific details? And you know, what exactly changes, like what's so different about late sequels compared to sequels made much closer in time, like outside of the obvious that, yeah, like the fact that we spend more time away from the original work, it tends to be harder to keep track of this, of the same understanding of that world building, but like other things might also incur. So what do you guys think about this topic?
I think personally, it's not necessarily about the people. I think a very dedicated fan who understands the original can do a much more competent job than a new director who has, or like the same director who completely forgot why the original was so beloved. again, look at the Hobbit compared to the Lord of the Rings. Same people, same development, same people in charge. Like I don't know. It's hard to say exactly because we are not in the business. We're just guys sitting at home talking about this. Unless you've actually been part of a huge production, you'll never know for sure. But I think it's a understanding why the original was so important and why it was so successful. B, not trying to copy what that original source material did too much, but also not stray away from it too much. So kind of try to take it in the middle. Alien would be a good another James Cameron sequel that really turned out very well. Like the original Alien was very claustrophobic. It was a horror movie in space. And then the second movie came and James Cameron was like, "Well, we're going to do something similar. We're going to stick to the original vibe, but we're going to introduce a little bit more action because instead of just people trapped on a ship like random civilians, this time it's people who actually know how to fight, how to deal with action. So it's going to be a group of Marines. And then instead of one alien to balance that out, instead of one alien, this time it's going to be many of them. We already saw how dangerous one of them can be in the first movie, so now there's multiple. So that respects the original source material, does something new, and keeps a balance between that. And I think the wrong examples would be just people who don't understand why the originals were good or trying to copy it so much that it might as well just not have been made because the original already exists. If you're gonna remake it point by point, what's the point? That's my take.
What about you, Xander?
Mm. Well, can you run the question again for me so I can be sure I fully understood?
Uh, what exactly are the ingredients for a late sequel to be good? Like, why is it harder for late sequels to be crafted with excellence compared to sequels that are made much closer to release? Like, sequels that weren't originally planned and took years to actually start to even consider making a sequel. Like, what makes this much harder outside of just, oh, it's the time spent away from the original work? Like, what exactly do you think it might be?
Well, in a lot of ways, it can be like just the time passing in general. A lot of things can happen. Like, uh, for example, the easiest example would be like, oh, in those 5 years, a lot of people that were in the original team for the original work just left and they're not there anymore. Or the original director just changed his mind about how certain things work, or how they should operate on those late sequels. Or just even just cynicism, really, with them wanting to make as much money as they can because they're like, oh, it's been years later and that thing sold well, so let's do it a sequel to it with without the real care that would be normally put into it that you'd really ought to want when making those things. And also the fact that once those expectations are in from the original thing and they are settled and time passes, people are going to rise their expectations in general because people are like, oh, it's been like normally in your mind, it would be like, oh, I don't like when things are rushed. I want things to be given more time. So it's like, oh, this thing has been in the making for 10 years. It must be great, right? When we all know that that's not how it works, but it's how generally how a lot of things are perceived even. And that's the rising expectations like that. The fact that you have to like tiptoe around eggshells in many ways to not piss off people, and the fact that things just change over time makes it really difficult. So you can deliver a product that appeals to both new people and old ones.
Cool. I just wanted to highlight one very awesome thing that was brought to the table by Don as well. Like, um, I agree that there really is this idea. I sometimes I think that there are some fans that demonstrate an understanding of the work that I feel that there isn't a necessity necessarily for the original team to be there to make a good late sequel. And I
Well,
put
of course,
I
I
put
know,
yeah, yeah, I put
but the thing is,
mm?
you cannot replicate someone's touch in something really. I do not believe that is possible.
Oh, no,
So
no, no,
even if you
of
make
course.
like a good late sequel, quote unquote, you could still make the argument of, oh, I can tell it is not made by the original people that made the first thing. It is probably made by people that know it well, at least.
Of course, of course. But there are
Well, but
some
there are examples of people recreating something or finding a continuation of something
in the style
and
of the
doing
original.
and yeah, and doing a much more competent job than the original people would have done if they would have made it back then.
Well, I'm not talking about like quality or competency. I'm talking about the
The
general
style, right?
feeling you get. Yes.
Yeah, but I think that
Well,
there are
even that,
some
even that can be copied pretty well. I don't know. There's people out there who have been studying certain movies or games so well, and they know the source material, they know the original intent. There's better Silent Hill games than there are Silent Hill games, which were made by fans.
Oh,
Like
yes, of course.
the
And
Silent Hill remake, the Silent Hill collection, which was like published by Konami, is vastly inferior to the fan version of it because they actually understand and remember all the little intricacies why things looked the way they did, and that tends to get like if we're getting into Zelda for one moment,
mm-hmm.
Aonuma doesn't like Majora's Mask. He kind of he pretends like he does, but he has also pointed out in many interviews that like a lot of the memories of Majora's Mask are very painful for him because it
Yeah.
was a very difficult thing. And Majora's Mask 3D kind of showed that he wanted to change things, but there's fan versions of Majora's Mask that are better than the 3DS version because they stayed more true to the original product, and they're proud of all those little flaws and things that were there that they kind of butchered in the 3DS remake. So sometimes the original creator isn't always the one who knows best. Sometimes the fans actually do know better.
Yeah.
well,
It's
yes,
rare,
Depends on
I
which
but it
fans.
agree.
happens.
I agree with that because haha, George Lucas, the meme. Uh,
Yeah.
but my point would still stand that you can try your best to replicate his style, and you'd probably get very close, but you still wouldn't be like 100%.
Oh yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah, but you don't
Identical
have to.
reproduction. Yeah, that's the thing. You don't have to make it 100%, but like I know a lot of things, a lot of
Yeah, of
works
course.
from fans that can get like 90% of that style, 85% of that style, and that's already fantastic because like even when you're looking at just how sequels are made, the good sequels usually they don't have the identical style of their predecessor. Like they maintain a good portion of it to maintain an identity because that's a big part of what makes a work be what it is. But like they change a little bit the style of each entry to make it unique. And in that sense, like if you have a fan that understands the style of a particular artist or a particular work, they can if they are able to replicate that in a good like in a good chunk of the experience, like a lot of fans would look at it and say, wow, that feels like the original in a lot of ways. Like I don't know if you guys are into Japanese films as well, but like I love Hideaki Anno's works. Like he is the guy who created Neon Genesis Evangelion. Like he made an adaptation on Godzilla, and the original, like today we look at Godzilla as just this icon that's wacky. There are many films with many different crossovers, and it's all crazy and etc. But a lot of people forget that the original a very serious and dark allegory of like human the human exploitation of nuclear technology. And Hideaki Anno made a new version of that in like 2015, I believe, or 2014. And if you watch that film and you watch the original 1954, like they are different films, yes, but there is still a lot of the original style kind of translated into this new version. And you can tell that there is such a thing as like, man, you're still able to create something new, but maybe there is someone out there that might be able to understand the style of the original artist and able to replicate it in a very good amount. And what Don said about Silent Hill, etc. Like, even I put Final Fantasy VII Advent Children here as a way to use this talking point as well, because a lot of people tend to say, man, if you have the original developers working on a sequel or on a prequel, etc., then it's bound that they are most likely going to be able to understand what the original was about, the characters, what they had in mind, because man, they created the thing, they were there, they had a life, they spent like over a year working on this work of art. So artists, a lot of the time, they see their product as a part of themselves, of their life, so they have value there. But even with all of that history, the end product still managed to be completely unrecognizable. Like Advent Children is basically a very dark and edgy rehash of the original, but in a world building context that makes little to no sense. And it's also a continuation to a story that was meant to have a very definitive and it's open-ended in the sense of exactly what happened, but the idea was that the story was designed to not have a sequel. But they made a sequel anyway with most of the original people who made the 1997 game, and it still turned out awful. So maybe someone of fans or whatever, I think it's more important to understand the original work and the original artists by heart, and the audience, like why do people love this work, what, just talk to fans.
Well,
I think
sometimes the artists themselves don't even seem to know why.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole problem.
Yeah,
That's why George Lucas keep putting in CGI stuff into the Star Wars remastered versions and stuff like that. Like, nobody asked for this, but you still put it in anyway because you somehow thought that this is what the movies needed. Artists are emotional people that are very much um, overwhelmed in a moment of creativity, and sometimes after that they won't exactly be able to know why they made what they made, and they might even criticize it, because I've made many things that other people say like, oh, that was so awesome, really good, and I'm like, eh, I wish I could have done it differently. I don't like it anymore now, to be honest. And that's the difficult thing about being a creator, is that
yeah,
if you create something, you've been watching that stuff from the very beginning. You've seen it grow from an idea into a final product, and there's a lot of things you like. You are much more observant about the flaws and the things that could have been done better, stuff that other people might not even notice or maybe even prefer because it turned out that way. And you somehow think afterwards, like years later, that you need to change it or that it needs to be better. But no, people like it the way it is, and artists tend to be very blinded by that. I can tell you that from first hand experience. It's very hard to distance yourself from that.
yeah. And especially in the development process, like some, if you're working on something for a while, you kind of start to get a sort of bias for what you were working on during that time. This is why a philosophy that I have with my work is usually when things are starting to get a bit like not repetitive, but when I spend too much time on my script, etc., I give it a break, like a few days, and I go back to it and I see it a completely different way, because sometimes it's exactly the case. Like our brains are kind of built this way. Like we're when we're so dedicated to a particular work for a long time, we try to complete it the more efficiently as possible, and sometimes we might not be able to see all the details all the time. And so this is why I think some artists, when they release a work and they come back to it a few years later, they look at it and say, "Man, I don't like it that much because maybe this was the break that they needed to look at their work and maybe see what was so different." A lot of the audiovisual works, it's people working on it all the time. Like it's basically a blitz on it. So I think that might also play a major role. That's actually a very good point, Don. Also, a cool parallel. I don't know how many of you guys are working a separate job, etc. But if you had a major moment in your life where you were like maybe interviewed for a very big opportunity in your life, I don't know if you guys had it, but I remember having a couple of them. And if you ask me how was the interview and what exactly did I say, what did I think, how did I convince them to achieve what I did, I would not be able to tell you most most of the interviews like what exactly I did. Because as you said, Don, like a lot of people just get overwhelmed by a sense of creativity and a lot of ideas show up. And when we're trying to apply all of this quickly with a certain deadline, etc., sometimes those ideas don't necessarily digest too well until we take a
Yeah.
break from it, etc. So that might also be I think that's an interesting parallel to make. I don't know if you guys agree or if you have also other life experiences that match this, because I found it to be very interesting.
I'm gonna give this one to Zander.
Run the question to me again. I kind of got lost again.
No, just I just made a parallel. Like you guys don't need to. If you guys don't have any experience that's kind of parallel to this, then it's okay. I was just referencing how Don mentioned how a lot of artists, they tend to get overwhelmed by the creative impulse when they work on something, and when they revisit it, a lot of the times they have a different reaction to it. And I gave an example of my experience with interviews of like with big opportunities in your life. I don't know if you've had any of them, but like I remember having some, and I don't remember exactly what happened in them anymore. I don't remember what exactly appealed to people, like what I said. Like there are some things that you just in the heat of the moment, like they there is some demand for you to be creative, for you to bring a solution, and you do it, and there are some people that love your solution, but when you look back at it, a lot of folks don't even remember anymore what exactly they had in mind. So yeah. Okay. So and
Uh,
What?
yeah.
Yeah.
since I haven't had any experience with that of creating any content, I cannot comment. But I
Mm.
do know it seems like it's often like extremes. Like a lot of people tend to feel like they think they make us like, oh, it's brilliant, it's perfect, or they're like, no, it's bad, I should fix it, and then in fixing it they ruin it or something like that.
Yeah. Well, again, getting back to Majora's Mask, um, like that game was created under a lot of pressure. Like Miyamoto basically said to Anuma, "You're gonna create this game in 1 year." Yeah, sure. Like they basically shook hands on it, and off they go, and they went to create the game. And it was a very stressful situation for them. And to be honest, that stress, that pressure, kind of translates into the game. The way the game is set up, like you always feel the pressure of the clock. You have to finish a certain amount of missions, but before time runs out, and then you have to go back again. And like there's a lot of time pressure, and in a way, it's almost poetic like the way that game reflects the actual development
Yeah.
of that time pressure. And then years later, like years and years later, Aonuma revisits that same game, and then he's like, "I didn't like how I did that. I didn't like how I chose to do that." And then he starts changing stuff, but now it's no longer under pressure. Now he has time to think about this stuff, so it's going to completely contradict the atmosphere of the game, because the game could have only existed under those circumstances. Those weird, time pressured moments is what made the game so good in the end. Because there's just no other way. And if you brought back any other artists that ever made something and put them right in front of their own creation right now, if you brought back Michelangelo and put him in front of the statue of David, I'm pretty sure he would be like, maybe I should do some work on the hips, or there's probably something. But after that, it's not the statue of David anymore because you've changed it, and that's why it's you cannot really recreate something the exact same way. It's impossible. If you try it, it's not gonna be that anymore. So either you make a new statue in this case that's even better or different, and you can appreciate it in its own way, or you just don't bother and you just leave it as it is. But if you try to change it later on, it often fails. And there's only a few examples I can think of remakes that actually did a very good job. It still felt like the original, but they updated it so it's still enjoyable for other people. Um, I don't know. It's a very hard thing to do, which is why I'm not a big fan of remakes. I know for Zelda, for instance, a lot of people are now asking for remakes of uh, the Oracle games and all that kind of stuff. We just got a Link's Awakening remake. And I'm just like, wouldn't you rather just have a new 2D Zelda game with a completely new story that's new to everyone instead of remaking games that already exist, of which we already know the story? At least many of us do. Um, are the games really that ugly now? Are they so unplayable that nobody can ever touch them again? Because I still play them and I still think they're really fun. I think the primitive graphics are actually that they've aged, and it has its charm. I don't know. Maybe I'm just rambling, but that's just how I feel about it. Sometimes things are best left in their time frame and the way they were then, which is why I'm against the Star Wars like updates that they did later on. Just keep the original as it was. Keep the original print. That's how they were made. You know, you can remaster them or make them 1080p. That's fine, but don't add scenes to them, or Han shoots first suddenly, or the other way around. Greedo shoots first suddenly. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Just leave it alone.
And you would you say that it's also a waste of time for sequels to be meandering and remaking? Because as we said, like The Force Awakens and Final Fantasy VII Remake, they are basically sequels, but they also spend such a long effort in trying to remake the original, right? In a sort
Yeah.
of ironic way, and Matrix Resurrections as well. Like the first half of the movie is basically like a weird remake of the original Matrix, right? There are even some shots that are direct parallels. It feels like
Yeah.
they are trying to remake it in a completely twisted lens, but this is why I share your opinion on that as well. Like when I see a sequel that is wasting so much time on remaking something and remaking it in a way that is just completely unrecognizable, like it falls into the trap that you just said with George Lucas. Like why not create something actually new? Like why not just drive forward the story as it is and try to maintain it at least consistent, instead of being so hung up with remaking the original? Like we already, a lot of people just know why they love it. They have access to it, and there are a lot of remakes, like you said, that are just unnecessary. Like
Yeah.
the Zelda fandom, indeed, I've seen some folks asking for remakes for games that are just completely fine. Like there's, I don't know about you, like to this day I see people asking for an HD remake of Ocarina of Time, and I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
Like it's genuinely like it's a perfect product of its time. It's an extremely polished experience. It already got a 3D remake recently, polishing up just slightly, like the inventory management, etc. But like, it's wonderful as it is. Like,
Yeah, it
if
doesn't
you're
need
going to
anything.
ask
Just
for
like
like a remake of
remaster it and port it
Zelda
to new platform.
2, like Zelda 2 is a game that is unanimously not okay, not unanimous, but most people would tell you like Zelda 2 is among, like, it's on the lower end of the Zelda series. Like it's clunky in a lot of ways, not just in terms of like, oh, old controls are clunky by default, but like Zelda 2 really needed a lot more time in the oven, and it's a game that would benefit a lot from a remake, right? But a lot of people tend to
Perhaps. Yeah.
resort to titles that they know are good, and they want that coming back, be it in a remake or a sequel in some form. And I think this
Mm.
approach to sequels is especially common with late sequels, because the fact that a late sequel is releasing so much time after the original, there's already a new generation of people, and they need that security, and they need to remind folks of what was that thing that they enjoyed. So a lot of people just want to seek safety in that aspect. So I think that's also why uh, this this method
It's
is so
definitely not
common.
easy.
Yeah.
It's definitely not easy bringing in new people without just dropping them like in the middle of what seems like half of a story that you have missed. Obviously, you're gonna have to recount some stuff and be like, "Hey, like this is what happened before," or but there's many smart ways to do it. I guess um, the best way to do it probably is just to accept the fact that some people don't need backstory. Sometimes it's okay to just let it roll. In fact, if you really think about it, the original Star Wars, A New Hope, it kind of starts like in the middle of something like, did I miss anything? Like, you feel like you're missing a lot of information. Like, who's this guy in the mask? Like, why are these people on this ship? What is this? What is that? You feel like you've already jumped into a story that's already been like a movie that's already been playing for halfway, basically. Um, but people still were able to get into it because all the new stuff that gets introduced works, and it's easy to understand. So you don't always have to go like give a whole monologue at the beginning of the movie and rehash all the stuff that happened before. You can do that very naturally, and those who are interested in the lore or become interested in the lore, they will figure it out. They will go back to the older movies and they want to know what happened. Just like how many people who played Breath of the Wild now for the first time, that was our first Zelda game, and they got into the story and the lore, they're now playing Twilight Princess and The Wind Waker because they want to know more about the world of Zelda. And those who don't care about lore, fine. They played the game, they had fun, and now they move on with their life. Um, I do want to quickly say I have to get going very soon,
Oh
like in
yeah.
a few minutes.
Yeah. We're going to reach our conclusion right now, actually. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to hear your closing thoughts on the matter. Like um, so what exactly do you think artists should keep in mind when making a late sequel? Did you learn anything from our discussion? Do you found it interesting, etc.? And yeah, at the end you can also show your content once again. I'll post the it's your channels are already in the description, by the way, for folks to check out.
Then it's fine. I don't really have a whole sales pitch
Yeah.
ready, uh, so
No, no
it's
problem.
fine. In
Well,
terms of conclusion, well, yeah, I mean, obviously, I always learn from people's perspectives. I'm not someone who's very rooted into the ground when it comes to my own opinions. So hearing other people talk about stuff really makes me also appreciate other vantage points. Um, in terms of what I think of late sequels, well, just respect the source material, choose the right people to work on it who have the passion to actually bring it back in the same way, and also just I guess there's also a little bit of luck, storm in a bottle involved. So, like a lightning in a bottle, not storm in a bottle. That's how it's called in Dutch. Sorry, storm in a glas we call it. But yeah. Uh, Sometimes you also just have to be lucky that it turns out the way it does. And if it doesn't always mean that the creators who did it hate the franchise or don't respect it. Filmmaking is hard, and I'm pretty sure any director wants to keep their like reputation high, and sometimes they're just not able to do it. Sometimes they do. Yeah, I guess that's about it.
all right. And you, Xander?
I mean, I would just tell them to like don't try to overextend yourself. Like when making like a late sequel, you don't need to like reinvent the wheel or do anything complicated. But also don't do the reverse. Don't like just try and copy what worked for the first few ones and just do it again. Like you need to sort of strike a balance between doing something new and bringing it off of the world so you can make something that still feels like it's a fucking sequel to whatever you're working with. And some type of stuff it's easy enough, I imagine. Like making a Mega Man game is not a rocket science thing, but Capcom sometimes still fucks it up, so what do I know? But I do think they stuff like Matrix Resurrections, they are like, oh yeah, let's try to reinvent the wheel and not, but yes. And I'm like, cool.
It's kind of conflicted in that way. Actually, it's you put it perfectly. But yeah, sorry. Continue.
Uh, yeah. No, that is just what I want to say, really.
Okay.
Don't just don't be an extremist, I guess.
Yeah.
Also, stick to your guns. That's also an important one for many filmmakers. Just stand behind your vision. Just do it. If it ends up being horrible, at least you did what you thought was right. Don't give into fan pressure because that destroys a lot of creativity. The fan pressure is fine after the fact, but not during the development stage. Or it's okay to listen to feedback once in a while, but if you have an idea, a vision for something, just go with it. And like I said, if it ends up not working, that's fine, but don't try to retcon yourself or try to like again always coming back to Star Wars. It really felt like the first Star Wars, like the sequel trilogy, obviously. The first one was like we're gonna appease all the fans. Then the second one was like we're gonna do completely different stuff, and then the third one was like actually all that stuff that was said in the second one, forget about that. We're just it's like well now I don't believe your whole story and continuation anymore because you have clearly bowed down to other people's opinions and you didn't have a clear vision in mind to keep it going. I'd much rather have someone who pushes their vision to the limit and just go for it and fail than someone who tries to constantly be like, oh no, I didn't mean that. It just, we changed this. It's no longer this. I hate that so much when people do that.
Well, that's those were all very interesting points. I would also say, like, even if you want to reinvent the wheel, like Kid Icarus Uprising, for example, when you look at it as a sequel to the original Kid Icarus, like it's a completely different type of experience. It's a different kind of tone, but it also still manages to be well received because it still calls back and respects the original material. And as you guys said, like, stick to your guns,
Oh
stay
yeah, it
balanced, etc.
what I said was more like general advice. Like
Well, no, yeah,
I wouldn't
yeah.
suggest you
Of
try to
course,
read
of
it.
course. Yeah,
It's not that it can't work. It's just that I'd rather you not try.
Well, there's just so many examples of things happening where people are getting something they didn't know they wanted instead of asking what they wanted.
exactly.
Majora's Mask wouldn't have existed if that was the case. If Nintendo would have listened to the fans, we would have just gotten Ocarina of Time 2 in every
Twilight
way
Princess,
possible.
basically.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Twilight Princess. And everybody respects, well, not everybody, but generally speaking, Majora's Mask is a more niche but also more respected game because it did something very ballsy. That's why I could never say that Nintendo is a greedy company that only cares about money, because they could have easily made Ocarina of Time 2 back then. Just reuse the engine and just do the exact same thing with more dungeons and blah blah blah. Instead, they were like, no, we're gonna try something really weird and experimental, and just show that we are artists.
Yeah,
And that is more important to me than listening to fans and adhering to their demands, because fan demands are, let's be honest, they're not
they
always the best
yeah.
demands.
Yeah,
Bec-
you just go read some fan fictions and you see the horror. Imagine if these people were writing. Holy crap,
exactly.
man. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
I
I
exactly.
like the
understand
Because
part where
your.
they
Mace Windu
Be-
was alive.
because they go by what they know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like even Smash Brothers, like if Masahiro Sakurai actually picked the characters that Smash fans were truly asking for, like, without the respect, like, man, it would have been a lot worse than the vision they had at hand. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Like, I think it's important mainly to have like a vision. When you start a late sequel, like, you might find yourself on the wall, like, uh, try to, you know, you have a whole fandom to please, etc. And as you said, Don, like, it's not the best idea to appease to fan demands all the time. But one thing that I do suggest is still have some sort of communication with fans, because it's sometimes you might not understand the appeal of a certain scene or a certain mechanic that you had, and if you listen to different opinions, not just throw your question on Twitter and then see what's the most liked comment, because
No.
sometimes the most popular takes are not always the best. So uh, like,
Yeah.
yeah, so try to just focus on your vision, but also try to establish a communication with fans in a way that you can really understand how you can continue off. Like, what's the
Well,
vision?
just look at From Software, how they handled their situation. You know, they have a network task. They allow people to send in their grievances or things that they feel like could be done more perfectly or better, but they don't change the formula. Because if we were to go by like very popular fan demand, Dark Souls and just the Soulsborne series in a whole would have had a difficulty setting by now, and that's not Miyazaki's vision of that
Oh,
series.
Miyazaki Vision also included Dark Souls 2 and 3 not existing.
Well, yeah, true, but like at least he stuck to his guns and he was like, you know what, these games are not for everybody. Done. End of
Yes.
discussion. We are not having an easy setting for people. This series is about feeling accomplished
Yeah.
and
Well,
getting your
they
ass
kind of
kicked.
have an easy setting anyways. You can summon phantoms. Haha.
True, true. Which I do. I do
Ah,
sometimes.
I
Not
cannot call you.
always.
See.
I did beat a dragon without them, so but yeah, no, like obviously the especially the original games were about trial and error, and if you include an easy setting, it's gonna destroy his vision. So he stuck to his guns on that. But that doesn't mean they don't change anything. Obviously, they've listened to fans about other smaller details, like, hey, I don't like how ladders work in this game, or, you know, can I turn off this function so we can make cinematic shots of the game? But whatever. But it's the core of your idea should probably remain intact, uh, and you shouldn't listen to people too much.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. 100%. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for coming here today. Thank you for all the comments. They were very enriching. It has been an honor to have you both here. I hope you guys enjoyed as well participating in this roundtable. And of course, I would love to
Oh,
have you
sure.
guys over again for any future topics that you might be interested in as well. Because yeah, like I hope at least you found you saw the how I don't know. I believe you found a lot of interesting things to take away from this. I think it's interesting to discuss about art and specific works, and I think growth comes a lot from listening to other people's wisdom as well. And yeah, so again, thank you so much for
Agreed.
coming, guys.
Uh,
Yeah.
Well, and to everyone watching, thank you so much for watching as well. And I hope to see you guys soon. So
Thank you for having us, and I had fun.
thank you, man. So yeah, guys, thanks for coming by and see you soon.